It always begins the same way. You go to bed exhausted. You tell yourself that tonight will finally be different. Tonight, you'll sleep deeply, 7 hours, maybe 8. No interruptions, no staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning wondering why your body betrayed you again. But then it happens. A few hours later, your eyes open. The room is dark, silent, heavy, and there it is. That pressure in your bladder. You roll over, hoping it will disappear. Maybe if you ignore it, sleep will come back. But it doesn't. So once again, you drag yourself out of bed, half asleep, disoriented, annoyed. Your feet touch the cold floor. You stumble through the darkness. And deep down, you already know what tomorrow will feel like. The heavy eyes, the brain fog, the irritability, the exhaustion that follows you all day long. And maybe, after enough nights like this, you've started telling yourself the same thing millions of men quietly whisper every year. I guess I'm just getting older. But what if that's not the real reason? What if waking up at 2 in the morning has far less to do with aging and almost nothing to do with that small glass of water you drank before bed? Because tonight, we're going to uncover something most men never hear. Your bladder may not actually be the problem. In fact, the bladder might only be the messenger. The real story begins much deeper inside the body, inside your hormones, your circulation, your kidneys, your body temperature, and one invisible force that has been affecting your sleep every single day of your life without you realizing it: gravity. And before this conversation ends tonight, you may completely rethink everything you believed about nighttime urination. Because hidden behind that frustrating 2 a.m. awakening, there are 3 massive biological mysteries most people never connect together. First, why do so many men wake up at almost the exact same time every night, even when their water intake changes? Second, why can a perfectly healthy man stop drinking water before bed and still wake up needing to urinate? And third, why does the body sometimes create more urine specifically after falling asleep instead of before? Those 3 questions are connected by a chain reaction so subtle, most people live their entire lives without ever seeing it. Until now. Tonight, we're going to slowly uncover the hidden physiology behind interrupted sleep. Not with fear, not with shame, not with gimmicks or miracle cures, but with real sleep science explained in a way your body can finally understand. You'll discover why late-night bathroom trips often begin in your legs hours before bedtime, how room temperature secretly changes kidney activity, why certain healthy foods may quietly trigger nighttime urination, how ancient survival mechanisms still control your bladder while you sleep, and why one tiny adjustment before bed can dramatically reduce nighttime awakenings for many men. And somewhere during this conversation, one of these hidden mechanisms may suddenly explain your own nights perfectly. Maybe it's the heavy dinner. Maybe it's the cold bedroom. Maybe it's the circulation changes no one ever told you about. Or maybe it's the simple mistake nearly every man makes before lying down. The most fascinating part is this: your body is probably not malfunctioning. It may actually be doing exactly what it was biologically designed to do. The problem is that modern habits quietly push those ancient systems into overdrive. And once you see the pattern, you can finally begin changing it. So tonight, don't listen to this like background noise. Listen like a detective listening to clues. Because your body has been leaving clues for years. The timing of your awakenings, the temperature of your room, the heaviness in your legs, the nights that are worse than others, the strange connection between exhaustion and bladder pressure. None of it is random. And by the end of tonight's journey, you'll understand why. So dim the lights. Relax your shoulders. Let your breathing slow down. And if you've ever stared at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, wondering, why does this keep happening to me? Then this conversation may change the way you sleep forever. And before we begin, if you enjoy deep science-based conversations about sleep, men's health, longevity, hormones, and the hidden biology affecting everyday life, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Not just for yourself, but because there are millions of exhausted men silently struggling through broken sleep every night, believing they are alone in this. They are not. And sometimes, one piece of understanding can change someone's life more than another night of frustration ever could. Now, let's uncover what's really happening inside the body at 2 in the morning. Good evening, my friend. And before you close your eyes tonight, I want to ask you something very simple. Why is it that so many men can fall asleep without any problem at all, yet, almost like clockwork, they suddenly wake up at 2 in the morning with an overwhelming urge to urinate? Why does it happen at nearly the same time, night after night, even on evenings when they barely drank any water? And perhaps the strangest question of all, why do some men continue suffering from this for years, even after trying every obvious solution they can think of? Tonight, we're going to slowly uncover those answers together. Not with fear, not with shame, and not with complicated medical language. Just calm science, ancient biology, and the hidden mechanisms inside the male body that most people never learn about. So, dim the lights if you can, loosen your shoulders, let your breathing slow down a little, and let's begin. Because somewhere out there right now, a man is climbing into bed with hope. Hope that tonight will finally be different. Maybe tonight he'll sleep deeply. Maybe tonight he'll make it all the way until sunrise. Maybe tomorrow morning he'll wake up refreshed instead of exhausted. He pulls the blanket over himself. The room becomes quiet, the house settles into silence, and for a little while, everything feels fine. But then, 2 o'clock in the morning arrives. Sometimes 1:47, sometimes 2:13, sometimes 2:28, but strangely, almost always somewhere around that hour. And suddenly his eyes open. Not fully at first, just enough to feel it, that pressure, that annoying, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore pressure in the bladder. Now he's awake, not because of noise, not because of stress, not because of pain, but because his body has decided once again that now is the perfect time to make him walk to the bathroom in the dark. And in that moment, something interesting happens psychologically. He becomes angry at himself. Maybe you know this feeling. You look at the clock and think, seriously? Again, you feel cheated, interrupted, almost betrayed by your own body. You slowly push the blanket away. Your feet touch the cold floor. Your vision is blurry. Your brain is foggy. And every step toward the bathroom feels heavier than it should. Then comes the second frustration. You already know what tomorrow morning will feel like. Heavy eyes, low energy, poor concentration, irritability, that strange mental exhaustion that coffee never completely fixes. And perhaps worst of all, the growing fear that this is simply what aging feels like now. That maybe this is normal. Maybe this is just what happens to men after 40, or 50, or 60. And because that belief becomes so common, most men never ask deeper questions. They simply blame the wrong thing. Usually, water. I shouldn't have drunk that tea. I knew that glass of water was a mistake. I drank too much before bed. Or they shrug and say something even more dangerous. Well, I guess I'm just getting old. But what if I told you something surprising tonight? What if the real reason many men wake up at 2 in the morning has far less to do with how much they drank and far more to do with what happens inside the body after they lie down? What if your bladder is not actually the villain in this story? What if it's only the messenger? Because hidden beneath this nightly interruption, there are deeper systems at work. Gravity, hormones, blood circulation, body temperature, fluid redistribution, ancient survival mechanisms buried deep inside human biology. And most men have absolutely no idea these systems even exist. That's why tonight is important. Because once you understand what your body is really doing at night, something changes psychologically. You stop fighting your body blindly. You stop blaming yourself. And you start noticing patterns that suddenly make perfect sense. For example, why do some men wake up more often during winter? Why do swollen ankles during the evening sometimes predict nighttime urination? Why can two men drink the exact same amount of water before bed, yet one sleeps peacefully while the other wakes up twice? And why do certain healthy foods quietly sabotage sleep without anyone realizing it? Those answers are coming. But before we get there, there's something else you need to understand first. This problem is unbelievably common, far more common than most men admit openly, because men rarely discuss sleep disruption honestly, especially when it involves urination. There's a strange silence around it, a quiet embarrassment. So millions of men experience the exact same struggle while secretly believing they're alone in it. But they're not. In fact, many men begin noticing the pattern gradually. At first, it happens once in a while, maybe after a late dinner, maybe after a stressful day, maybe after drinking tea at night. But over time, the body starts repeating the cycle more consistently. Once a week becomes twice, twice becomes every other night. Then suddenly, it becomes routine. And that's when exhaustion begins accumulating quietly. Not dramatic exhaustion, not collapse, just chronic depletion, the kind that slowly steals quality from life. You become less patient, less sharp, less motivated, less emotionally balanced. Your sleep becomes fragmented, and fragmented sleep changes everything. Your hormones, your metabolism, your mood, your memory, your immune system. Even testosterone regulation becomes affected by disrupted deep sleep. And here's the unsettling part. Most men never connect these daytime symptoms back to those tiny nighttime awakenings. They think, I'm just stressed, I'm just busy, I'm just aging. But the body remembers every interruption, even the short ones, especially the ones happening repeatedly at the same biological hour each night. Now, before we go further, I want you to pay attention to something fascinating. Why does the wake up often happen specifically around 2 in the morning? Not 6, not 7. Why then? That question matters more than most people realize, because the timing itself is actually a clue, a biological clue. Your body runs on rhythms, hormonal waves, temperature cycles, pressure regulation systems, fluid management systems, and around 2 in the morning, several of those systems intersect in very specific ways. That intersection is where tonight's mystery begins. But there's another question we still haven't answered yet. If this problem is driven by biology, then why do some men experience it constantly while others almost never do? That answer leads into one of the biggest misunderstandings in modern sleep health, because the real issue often begins long before bedtime, sometimes hours before, sometimes while standing, walking, working, even sitting. And the strangest part? Many men accidentally create the perfect conditions for nighttime urination during the daytime without realizing it. We'll get there soon. But first, I want to tell you something important. For the past 12 years, I've spent countless hours studying patterns in male health and sleep behavior. And one thing became clear very quickly. Most men do not need shame. They do not need panic. And they definitely do not need random miracle supplements advertised online at 2 in the morning. What they need is understanding. Because once a man understands what his body is trying to do, fear decreases. And when fear decreases, the body itself often relaxes. That matters more than you think. Because anxiety creates another hidden layer of nighttime awakening. The brain begins anticipating interruption. And once anticipation starts, sleep becomes lighter, more fragile. The body enters the night defensively instead of peacefully. Maybe you've experienced this. You wake once at 2 a.m. several nights in a row, and suddenly your brain starts checking the clock subconsciously every night. Now you're not only dealing with bladder signals, you're dealing with sleep anxiety. And that combination can become incredibly exhausting over time. Which brings us back to our 3 unanswered questions. Why does this happen specifically around 2 in the morning? Why does it continue even when water intake seems normal? And why do some of the most healthy nighttime habits actually make the problem worse? Tonight, we're going to untangle all of it slowly, step by step. Because the truth is, the body is not malfunctioning randomly. It's responding logically to signals. Signals most people never notice. And hidden inside those signals is a surprisingly simple path toward deeper sleep. Not perfect sleep overnight, not magic, not instant transformation, but real improvement, the kind built through understanding. So if you're listening right now, perhaps lying in bed already, wondering whether tonight will be another interrupted night, stay with me. Because the first hidden mistake almost every man makes begins with something that seems completely harmless, a small drink taken at the wrong time. And that small drink, taken at the wrong time, is usually where the blame begins. But tonight, I want to slow things down for a moment. Because before we go deeper into hormones, kidneys, circulation, and the strange biological events that unfold around 2 in the morning, I think it's important for you to understand something about the voice speaking to you right now. Not because this is about authority, and not because anyone needs to impress you with complicated credentials, but because when a man is exhausted night after night, he deserves guidance that comes from observation, not guesswork. For more than 12 years, I've spent thousands of hours studying patterns in male health, not only in clinics, not only through textbooks, but through conversations. Real conversations. Quiet conversations with tired men who sat across from me and described the exact same story in slightly different ways. Some were in their 40s, some in their 60s, some successful, some struggling, some physically fit, others carrying years of stress and exhaustion in their bodies. But again and again, the same frustration appeared. I wake up every night around 2. At first, many of them assumed the problem was simple: too much water, too much tea, too much coffee, too much aging. But what fascinated me over the years was how often those explanations turned out to be incomplete. Because some men barely drank anything before bed and still woke up. Others drank more than expected, yet slept through the night. Some improved dramatically after changing one tiny habit. Others kept chasing the wrong solution for years. And slowly, a pattern began emerging. A hidden pattern most people never notice. The body was behaving logically, not randomly. That's one of the most important things I hope you take away from tonight. Your body is rarely trying to sabotage you, even when it feels that way at 2 in the morning. Usually it's responding to signals connected to circulation, temperature, hormones, pressure regulation, fluid movement. And once you understand those signals, the fear around nighttime waking begins to soften. That matters more than most people realize, because fear itself changes sleep. A man who feels confused by his body sleeps differently than a man who understands what's happening. One becomes tense, the other becomes observant. One fights the body, the other learns from it. And over the years, I noticed something else that surprised me. Many men silently carry shame about this issue. Not extreme shame, not dramatic embarrassment, just a quiet discomfort. They don't bring it up with friends. They don't discuss it openly. Sometimes they don't even mention it to their doctor for years. Because part of them assumes this is probably just aging. Or worse, this is something I just have to live with now. But the truth is far more interesting than that. And honestly, far more hopeful. Because while aging can absolutely influence nighttime urination, many of the strongest triggers are actually mechanical and biological. Not inevitable. Not destiny. Which means small adjustments can sometimes create surprisingly large improvements. But before we reach those adjustments, there's another important question we need to explore. Why does this problem create such intense exhaustion, even when the man technically goes back to sleep? That question puzzled many people for years. After all, if you only wake up for 3 minutes, why would you feel terrible the next morning? The answer lies inside the architecture of sleep itself, because deep sleep is delicate, especially during the second half of the night. When you abruptly wake at 2 in the morning, your body doesn't simply pause sleep like a movie and resume perfectly afterward. Instead, your nervous system shifts states. Blood pressure changes, heart rate changes, brainwave patterns change, stress hormones fluctuate slightly. Then your brain must rebuild the descent back into restorative sleep again. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not. And the older the body becomes, the more fragile that process often gets. That's why so many men describe the same experience. I can fall asleep easily at the beginning of the night, but after that bathroom trip, my sleep is never the same. Exactly. Because the interruption matters more than people think, especially when repeated night after night for months or years. And this is where many men accidentally make another mistake. Instead of investigating the root cause, they begin obsessing over symptoms. They monitor every sip of water. They become anxious before bed. They restrict hydration too aggressively. They become hyper-aware of their bladder. Ironically, that anxiety itself can make nighttime awakenings worse. The brain becomes vigilant, protective, and once the brain enters that pattern, sleep becomes lighter and easier to interrupt. This is why I want tonight's conversation to feel calm, not alarmist, not catastrophic, because your body responds differently when you approach it with curiosity instead of fear. That may sound simple, but biologically it matters. The nervous system listens to emotional tone. Now, over the years, I've also learned that men appreciate practical explanations, not lectures, not abstract theory, not impossible routines requiring 20 lifestyle changes overnight, just clear understanding, something they can actually use. And that's exactly where we're going tonight, Because hidden inside this problem are several fascinating biological mechanisms most people have never been taught. Mechanisms involving gravity, blood pooling, temperature regulation, kidney timing, hormonal signaling, and perhaps the strangest part of all, some of these systems were originally designed to help human beings survive thousands of years ago, long before modern bedrooms existed, long before air conditioning, long before artificial lighting, long before late-night snacks and glowing phone screens. Your body is ancient, far older than modern life, which means some nighttime behaviors that seem irrational today once served a purpose. That matters enormously when trying to understand why the bladder suddenly becomes active at 2 in the morning. But before we reveal the first major hidden trigger, I want you to notice something in your own life. Have you ever experienced nights where the problem was strangely worse after sitting for long periods, or after long drives, flights, standing all day, eating late, sleeping in an overheated room? Most people never connect those events together, but they are connected, deeply connected. And once you see the connection, you can never unsee it again. That's when the mystery starts transforming into a system, a predictable system. And predictable systems can be influenced. Now, another thing I learned after years of observing male sleep patterns is that men often underestimate how adaptive the body really is. Small behaviors repeated consistently create powerful biological consequences over time, not because the body is weak, but because the body is constantly responding, always adjusting, always compensating, always interpreting signals from your environment. That means even tiny habits before bed can quietly shape what happens 4 or 5 hours later. And here's where things become truly fascinating. Sometimes the real cause of a 2 a.m. bathroom trip actually begins much earlier in the evening, before the man even lies down. In some cases, before dinner is even finished. That realization surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. Because most people think nighttime urination begins inside the bladder, but in reality, the chain reaction often starts elsewhere entirely. Sometimes in the bloodstream, sometimes in the legs, sometimes in body temperature regulation, sometimes in hormonal timing. And slowly all those systems converge in the middle of the night. That convergence is the real story. Not simply drinking too much water. Which brings us back to one of the biggest unanswered questions of all. If the bladder is only the messenger, then what is sending the message? What biological process builds silently for hours, then suddenly wakes a man at exactly the wrong moment? We're about to begin uncovering that answer. And the first clue starts with something almost every man believes he already understands perfectly. Water. Water. Such a simple thing. Transparent, ordinary, essential for life. And yet, for millions of men waking at 2 in the morning, water has quietly become the accused criminal, the nightly suspect, the thing they blame before they blame anything else. That extra glass before bed, that cup of tea after dinner, that small sip taken while brushing their teeth. And to be fair, sometimes fluid intake does matter. But tonight, I want to gently dismantle one of the biggest misconceptions in nighttime urination. Because if waking at 2 in the morning were only about drinking too much water, the problem would be incredibly easy to solve. Just drink less. Problem solved. Except that's not what happens. Many men try exactly that. They stop drinking water after dinner. They avoid tea, they avoid coffee, some even dehydrate themselves slightly before bed. And still, 2 in the morning arrives, still awake, still walking to the bathroom, still exhausted the next day. So something else must be happening, something deeper, something hidden beneath the obvious explanation. And once you understand this hidden layer, your entire view of nighttime urination changes forever. Because the bladder, surprisingly, is often not the true problem at all. The bladder is usually just the messenger, the alarm bell. The final receiver of a process that began somewhere else in the body hours earlier. That realization changes everything. Imagine for a moment that your house has a smoke alarm going off every night. You could become angry at the alarm, you could cover it with a pillow, you could blame the alarm for disturbing your sleep, but the alarm itself is not the real issue. Something triggered it. And in many men, the same thing happens with the bladder. The bladder announces the problem, but it did not create the problem. So who did? That's where the story becomes fascinating. Because hidden behind those 2 in the morning awakenings, there is an entire orchestra of biological systems working together: gravity, hormones, blood circulation, temperature regulation, kidney activity, fluid redistribution. And the strangest part of all, these systems are behaving exactly the way human biology evolved to behave. Your body is not malfunctioning randomly in the middle of the night. It is following instructions, ancient instructions, instructions written long before modern life existed, long before humans slept in climate-controlled bedrooms, long before late-night television, long before artificial lighting, long before evening snacks and midnight scrolling. And sometimes, those ancient systems clash with modern habits in ways that create the perfect storm for nighttime awakening. Let's begin with something most people never think about: gravity. During the daytime, your body spends hours upright, standing, walking, sitting, driving, working. And while you move through your day, gravity quietly pulls fluid downward, especially toward the legs and feet. Now, here's the strange part. You usually don't notice this happening consciously, but your body notices. By evening, tiny amounts of fluid have accumulated in the lower parts of the body. That's why some men notice. Their socks leave marks, their shoes feel tighter, their ankles look slightly puffier at night. Not dramatic swelling necessarily, just subtle fluid retention. Now imagine what happens when that man finally lies down at night. Suddenly, gravity changes. The body is no longer vertical. That fluid which spent hours pooled in the legs now begins redistributing back into circulation, back into the bloodstream, back toward the center of the body. And when blood volume increases, the kidneys notice immediately. Because the kidneys are not passive organs, they are incredibly sensitive biological filters, constantly measuring pressure, fluid balance, electrolytes, circulation changes. The moment extra fluid re-enters circulation, the kidneys respond. And their response is simple: filter more fluid, produce more urine. Not because you drank too much water recently, but because your body redistributed fluid internally after lying down. This is one of the great hidden secrets behind nighttime urination. Sometimes the water waking you at 2 in the morning was already inside your body long before bedtime. That realization shocks many people because suddenly the timing makes sense, the delay makes sense, and those mysterious nighttime awakenings stop feeling random. But gravity is only one part of the story, because another invisible player enters the scene after darkness falls. Hormones, especially one hormone that almost nobody talks about outside medical conversations, a hormone called ADH, antidiuretic hormone, and despite its complicated name, its job is beautifully simple. At night, ADH tells the kidneys, slow down, conserve water, let the body sleep. Under healthy conditions, this hormone rises naturally during sleep. That's one reason humans can usually sleep for long stretches without needing to urinate constantly. Your body intentionally reduces nighttime urine production. An elegant biological design. But here's where things become interesting. Many modern behaviors interfere with this system: late night eating, late fluid intake, stress, poor sleep quality, overheated rooms, fragmented sleep patterns. All of these can quietly disrupt the hormonal rhythm your body depends on. And when that rhythm weakens, the kidneys may continue behaving as if it's daytime, producing more urine than necessary. Which leads to another important question. Why does temperature matter so much? That answer surprises almost everyone, because temperature affects circulation directly. If the room becomes too cold, blood vessels in the arms and legs constrict. The body does this to preserve heat around vital organs. Suddenly, more blood shifts toward the body's center. And once again, the kidneys interpret this as excess fluid volume, so they begin filtering more aggressively. This phenomenon is so real, it even has a name: cold-induced diuresis. In simple terms, cold environments can literally increase urine production, which means sometimes the real trigger for a 2 a.m. bathroom trip isn't what you drank. It's the temperature of the room you slept in, or the way your circulation responded during the night. Now pause for a moment and think about how strange this all is. Most men spend years blaming a glass of water, while completely overlooking gravity, circulation, hormonal timing, body temperature, and fluid redistribution. The body is infinitely more interconnected than people realize. And tonight's mystery keeps getting deeper, because we still haven't answered another critical question. Why do these awakenings often happen at nearly the same time every night? Why 2 in the morning? Why not randomly? That pattern is not accidental. The human body operates on rhythms, hormonal rhythms, temperature rhythms, sleep cycle rhythms, kidney filtration rhythms, and during certain windows of the night, these systems overlap in ways that make awakening more likely, especially if fluid redistribution has already increased kidney workload. Now, suddenly, the entire experience starts looking less like a bladder problem and more like a full body nighttime chain reaction. And that chain reaction usually begins silently, hours before you ever wake up. This is why simply drinking less water often fails, because the body's internal fluid management system is vastly more complicated than people assume. Your body is constantly moving fluid between tissues, blood vessels, organs, and storage spaces, always adjusting, always balancing, even while you sleep, especially while you sleep. And perhaps the most important thing to understand tonight is this: the body is trying to protect equilibrium, not punish you, not ruin your sleep, not betray you. Everything happening has a biological reason. Once you understand those reasons, fear decreases. And when fear decreases, the body often relaxes too. But we're only beginning to uncover this puzzle. Because hidden inside everyday nighttime habits, there are several surprisingly common mistakes that quietly amplify these biological processes. Mistakes so normal, most men never even suspect them. And the first one begins with something millions of people believe they are already doing correctly: the timing of water itself. The timing of water itself. At first glance, that sounds almost too simple, too ordinary, too obvious to possibly explain something as frustrating and persistent as waking up every night at 2 in the morning. But that's exactly why this topic becomes so deceptive. Because the body hides complex biological reactions beneath extremely ordinary behaviors. A small cup of tea, a late dinner, a cold bedroom, a pair of swollen ankles after standing all day. Tiny things. Things most men would never connect together. And yet, those tiny things often build the exact chain reaction that ends with a sleepy walk to the bathroom in darkness. That's why tonight, I want to guide you through this mystery carefully. Not randomly, not all at once, but step by step. Because when men try solving this problem without understanding the order of importance, they often waste years chasing the wrong solutions. Some buy supplements, some stop drinking enough water, some blame aging completely, some assume their bladder is permanently damaged. Meanwhile, the real triggers continue operating quietly in the background. So here's what we're going to do together tonight. We're going to move through 5 extremely common mistakes, 5 hidden habits and biological misunderstandings that silently increase nighttime urination in men, and we're going to move through them in reverse order, from mistake number 5 all the way down to mistake number 1. Now, you might wonder, why use a countdown at all? Why not simply list everything randomly? Because the body itself works in layers. Some causes are mild, some are moderate, and some sit at the very center of the entire problem. And what I've discovered over years of studying male sleep patterns is that many men improve a little after fixing one issue, but improve dramatically after uncovering the deepest one. That final hidden mistake, the one we'll eventually arrive at, changes how many men understand nighttime urination forever. In fact, for some people, it cuts nighttime awakenings almost in half, not through medication, not through complicated therapies, but through understanding a biological mechanism almost nobody talks about. That's why I want you to stay curious tonight, because each layer of this discussion connects to the next, like pieces of a puzzle slowly locking together. At first, certain things may seem unrelated: water timing, body temperature, dinner choices, sleeping position, hormones. But by the end, you'll begin seeing how astonishingly connected the human body really is. And honestly, once you see the pattern clearly, it becomes difficult to unsee. Now, before we begin revealing these 5 mistakes, I want to return briefly to those 3 important questions we opened earlier. Why do so many men wake specifically around 2 in the morning? Why does the problem continue even when water intake seems normal? And why do some healthy nighttime habits secretly make the situation worse? Those 3 questions are our guiding thread tonight. Notice something important here. We have not answered them fully yet, not intentionally, because understanding the body works best in stages. Each answer unlocks another layer. That's how real curiosity works. The brain stays engaged when it senses there is still something hidden ahead. And interestingly enough, your own body behaves similarly. The nervous system constantly anticipates patterns, predicts outcomes, searches for hidden signals. That anticipation system once helped humans survive. Thousands of years ago, staying alert to patterns meant survival. And even now, your brain still responds strongly to mystery and incomplete information. That's why a question can linger in the mind for hours, why a strange symptom becomes mentally exhausting, why uncertainty itself can disturb sleep. The human brain hates unresolved puzzles, especially puzzles involving the body. And nighttime urination becomes one of those puzzles for many men, because on the surface, it appears simple, yet underneath, it is surprisingly complex. Now, let me tell you something fascinating. One of the biggest reasons men struggle to solve this problem is because they usually focus on the final event instead of the earlier chain reaction. They focus on the bathroom trip itself. But by the time you wake up at 2 in the morning, the biological process has already been unfolding for hours. The body has already shifted fluids, adjusted circulation, responded to temperature, interpreted pressure changes, regulated hormones, and altered kidney activity. The bathroom trip is merely the final visible chapter, not the beginning of the story. That distinction matters enormously, because once you understand where the story truly begins, solutions suddenly become much more practical, much more logical, and much less frightening. Now, as we move deeper into these 5 mistakes, I want you to listen carefully for something else too. Patterns in your own life. Maybe you'll recognize certain habits. Maybe certain explanations will suddenly connect with experiences you've had for years. That moment happens often. A man hears one small explanation and suddenly says, "Wait, that's exactly what happens to me." Those moments are powerful because understanding removes helplessness. And helplessness is one of the most exhausting feelings a person can carry into sleep, especially men who already live under constant pressure during the daytime. Work pressure, financial pressure, family pressure, aging pressure. Then nighttime arrives, and even sleep begins feeling unreliable. That slowly erodes confidence in the body itself. Which is why tonight isn't just about urination. It's really about restoring trust between a man and his own biology. Understanding instead of panic. Observation instead of shame. Now here's something very important. None of the 5 mistakes we discussed tonight exist completely alone. They interact. One amplifies another. For example, a man who eats too late may also sleep hotter. A man who sleeps hotter may produce lighter sleep. Lighter sleep may make bladder signals easier to notice. Meanwhile, fluid redistribution may already be increasing kidney activity underneath the surface. Multiple systems stacking together. And when enough small triggers align, 2 in the morning arrives right on schedule. That's why some nights feel worse than others. Because the body is responding to combinations, not single isolated causes. Now, as we count downward from 5 toward 1, you may notice something psychologically interesting happening too. At first, certain explanations may seem minor. But gradually, the deeper mechanism begins revealing itself. And by the time we arrive at the final hidden mistake, many listeners suddenly realize that explains years of frustration. That final mechanism involves something so ordinary, so constant, that most people never think about it at all. Yet it affects circulation every minute of every day. Even now, especially now. And once you understand how it influences the kidneys at night, the entire mystery of waking at 2 in the morning begins making eerie biological sense. But before we uncover that final piece, we need to move carefully through the earlier mistakes first, because each one prepares your understanding for the next. Think of this like descending deeper into the body's nighttime systems, each layer revealing another, each answer creating a new question, and somewhere ahead, hidden inside one of these ordinary habits, lies the reason so many men continue waking despite believing they already tried everything. That's the mystery we're slowly unraveling tonight. So stay with me, because the first hidden mistake, the one most men unknowingly repeat every single evening, begins with an assumption that feels completely reasonable, an assumption about drinking water that turns out to be deeply incomplete, an assumption about drinking water that turns out to be deeply incomplete. And we're about to explore it together in detail. But before we continue deeper into tonight's journey, I want to pause for just a moment and say something from the heart. If you're listening right now, somewhere in the quiet darkness, maybe lying in bed, maybe unable to sleep, maybe hoping this night will finally be different, then I want you to know something very clearly. You are not strange. You are not weak. And you are certainly not alone. One of the most surprising things I discovered over the years is how many men silently suffer through sleep problems without ever talking about them openly. Not because the issue is rare, but because men are trained to normalize discomfort, to tolerate exhaustion, to ignore symptoms, to push through. So they keep functioning during the day while quietly deteriorating at night. And eventually, exhaustion becomes their normal state. They stop remembering what deep restorative sleep even feels like. That's why conversations like this matter. Because sometimes a single piece of understanding changes everything. Not instantly, not magically, but enough to begin reversing years of frustration. And honestly, many men only discover these ideas because someone else shared them first. A brother, a friend, a stranger online, a late-night video recommendation. That's the strange beauty of knowledge. One small insight passed from one person to another can quietly improve someone's life in ways we never fully see, maybe even save years of unnecessary suffering. So if tonight's conversation already feels meaningful to you, if part of you is already thinking, wait, nobody has ever explained it like this before, then I'd like to ask something simple. Take 1 second to like this video. Not for algorithms, not for numbers, but because every interaction quietly helps this information reach another exhausted man somewhere out there who still believes he's the only one waking at 2 in the morning every night. And trust me, there are millions of them. Men lying awake in dark rooms right now, frustrated, confused, tired, blaming themselves, blaming age, blaming water. While never realizing their body is following hidden biological patterns they were simply never taught to understand. That's why these conversations matter more than people think, because information changes behavior, and behavior changes biology, sometimes dramatically. Now, if you enjoy calm science-based explanations like this, gentle conversations that combine sleep, health, aging, hormones, and the hidden systems inside the body, then consider subscribing and joining me each week, because there are so many mysteries about male health that almost nobody explains properly. Why men wake up exhausted even after sleeping enough. Why stress changes nighttime urination. Why certain sleeping positions affect circulation. Why body temperature secretly controls sleep depth. Why aging changes hormone timing. Why some men feel tired at exactly the same hour every afternoon. Why anxiety and bladder sensitivity become connected over time. These are not random symptoms, they are connected systems. And once you begin understanding those systems, your relationship with your own body changes. You stop seeing your body as an enemy. You start seeing patterns, signals, messages. And honestly, that shift alone often reduces fear tremendously, because uncertainty is exhausting, especially at night. Now, something else happens when people listen to these conversations regularly. They begin noticing things they previously ignored. Tiny details, the timing of meals, the temperature of the bedroom, the heaviness in the legs at night, the difference between light sleep and deep sleep, the subtle effect of evening habits. The body starts becoming more understandable, less mysterious, less frustrating, and that awareness creates a strange kind of relief. Not because every symptom disappears immediately, but because confusion begins disappearing. That matters more than people realize. A confused mind sleeps differently than a calm one. Remember that. Now, here's another reason I hope you'll stay with this journey all the way through tonight. The final hidden mistake we're building toward, the one connected to gravity and fluid redistribution, explains something that many men have unknowingly experienced for years without understanding. And once you hear it, you may suddenly recognize your own body inside the explanation. You may remember evenings where your ankles felt swollen, days where standing longer made nighttime worse, cold nights where you woke more often, heavy dinners followed by restless sleep. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces begin connecting. That moment is powerful. And honestly, it's one of my favorite moments in conversations like this, when confusion transforms into recognition, because recognition creates possibility. And possibility creates hope. Not fake hope, not miracle cure hope, Realistic hope, the kind built on understanding how the body actually works. Now let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever noticed how many men carry their exhaustion silently? They go to work, drive home, handle responsibilities, smile when necessary. But underneath, they are running on fragmented sleep for years. And over time, fragmented sleep changes a man, emotionally, mentally, physically. Patience becomes thinner, energy becomes unstable, focus weakens, stress tolerance drops, even motivation changes. And because these changes happen gradually, most men never connect them back to interrupted sleep. They assume this is just adulthood, this is just stress, this is just aging. But sometimes the problem begins with something as small as waking repeatedly at 2 in the morning. That's why tonight's topic matters so much more than people think. This isn't just about urination. It's about recovery, hormones, brain restoration, nervous system repair, emotional balance, deep sleep quality, all of it connected. And as we continue tonight, you're going to see just how interconnected these systems truly are, especially once we begin discussing hormones and temperature regulation in more detail later, because those two systems, surprisingly, influence nighttime urination far more than most people imagine. But before we arrive there, we still need to dismantle one of the oldest misconceptions surrounding sleep and bladder function: the belief that nighttime urination is simply a matter of drinking too much. That explanation feels intuitive, simple, comforting even, because simple explanations make problems feel controllable. But biology is rarely that simple, and your body, especially at night, operates according to ancient survival systems that modern life constantly disrupts, which leads us directly into the first hidden mistake. A mistake so common, so ordinary, that millions of men repeat it every evening while believing they are being careful. And strangely enough, the problem isn't always how much water they drink. Sometimes it's when they drink it. Sometimes it's when they drink it. This is where the first major misunderstanding begins. And honestly, it's an understandable misunderstanding, because most people think about hydration in a very mechanical way. Drink water, bladder fills, go to the bathroom. Simple, direct, logical. But the human body does not operate like a straight pipe. It operates like a living timing system. Everything inside you works according to rhythms, delays, signals, hormonal coordination, and biological scheduling. Which means the timing of a small drink can matter far more than the size of the drink itself. That surprises many men, especially men who genuinely believe they are already being careful. They proudly say, "I barely drink anything before bed." And technically, they're telling the truth. Maybe it's only half a glass of water, maybe a small cup of tea, maybe a few careful sips while taking vitamins, maybe a warm herbal drink meant to help relaxation. Tiny amounts, amounts that seem harmless. And that's exactly why this mistake becomes so deceptive. Because the brain thinks in quantity, but the body often reacts to timing. That distinction changes everything. Now imagine a man finishing dinner around 8:30 at night. He avoids alcohol, avoids large drinks, avoids soda. He feels responsible. Then around 9:30, maybe while watching television, he drinks a small cup of tea. Not much, just enough to soothe the throat, just enough to relax. Then he heads to bed around 10:30, feeling confident. This amount is tiny, he thinks. There's no way this could wake me later. But somewhere deep inside the body, a completely different process has already begun. Because fluids do not instantly become urine the moment they enter the stomach. The body must first absorb the liquid through the digestive system. Then the fluid enters circulation. Then the bloodstream carries it throughout the body. Then the kidneys evaluate fluid balance. Then filtration gradually increases. Then urine production rises. All of this takes time. And here's the critical detail most people never realize. The delay often aligns almost perfectly with the middle of the night. Now suddenly, the timing of those 2 in the morning awakenings begins making much more sense. The problem wasn't necessarily too much water. The problem was creating a delayed biological workload for the kidneys right before sleep. And the kidneys are incredibly obedient organs. If fluid enters circulation, they respond, especially when nighttime hormonal signals become disrupted. Now remember one of the big unanswered questions we introduced earlier. Why do some men wake up even after drinking very little? This is part of the answer, because the body cares about internal timing. not just total volume. A small drink at the wrong time may disturb sleep more than a larger drink consumed much earlier in the day. That feels counterintuitive at first, but biologically, it makes perfect sense. The kidneys do not own clocks. They respond to conditions. And when fluid processing overlaps with deep sleep cycles, nighttime awakening becomes far more likely. Now, here's another fascinating detail. Many men unknowingly make this worse because they delay hydration all day. Busy morning. Coffee instead of water. Stressful afternoon. Long hours working. Then evening arrives, and suddenly the body becomes thirsty. So they begin drinking more fluids late in the day without fully realizing it. Not excessively, just gradually. A drink with dinner, another after dinner, a few more sips before bed. Individually, each seems harmless, but together, they quietly shift fluid processing deeper into the night. And once again, the body responds logically, not maliciously. That's important to remember. The body is not punishing you. It is simply managing fluid according to biological rules. Now, there's something psychologically interesting about this mistake, too. Because humans naturally trust immediate cause and effect relationships. If we eat something spicy and immediately feel heat, we connect the two. If we drink coffee and suddenly feel alert, we connect the two. But nighttime urination often operates with delayed consequences. That delay hides the true cause. A man drinks tea at 9:30, but the consequence appears at 2 in the morning. 5 hours later. By then, the connection feels invisible. And invisible patterns are the hardest patterns for humans to recognize. That's why so many people remain trapped in this cycle for years. Not because the body is mysterious, but because delayed biological reactions are difficult to notice without understanding timing. Now let's go deeper. Because fluid timing becomes even more important once hormones enter the picture. Remember ADH? The hormone designed to help humans sleep through the night without constantly urinating? This hormone usually rises during sleep and tells the kidneys to conserve water. In simple terms, ADH whispers to the body, slow down. Nighttime has arrived. Reduce urine production. But when fluid intake happens too close to bedtime, the kidneys receive mixed signals. On one side, the brain is trying to enter nighttime conservation mode. On the other, fresh fluid keeps arriving in circulation, demanding filtration. Now the kidneys must choose which signal matters more. And very often, filtration wins. Especially in older adults where hormonal rhythms may already be lighter or more fragile. This is why some men experience sudden worsening of nighttime urination as they age, even when their habits appear unchanged. The biological buffering systems become less forgiving. The body still functions brilliantly, but timing becomes more important than before. Now pause for a moment and think about how subtle this entire process really is. A tiny drink, a delayed reaction, a hormonal overlap, a sleep interruption hours later. No dramatic symptoms, no obvious warning signs, just a quiet chain reaction unfolding beneath consciousness. And because it feels invisible, many men underestimate how powerful timing truly is. Now, another important detail. This does not mean men should fear water. That's a huge mistake, too. Some people hear discussions like this and immediately begin restricting hydration aggressively. That creates different problems: fatigue, headaches, poor circulation, kidney stress, even worse sleep quality. The goal is not dehydration. The goal is strategic timing. That distinction matters enormously. Healthy hydration should happen primarily earlier in the day when the body is naturally designed to process fluids efficiently. Morning, afternoon, early evening. Then gradually, fluid intake decreases as nighttime approaches. This aligns the body with its natural hormonal rhythms instead of fighting against them. And the beautiful thing about this adjustment is that it's gentle. No medication, no extreme restriction, no suffering, just timing. But here's where tonight's mystery becomes even more interesting. Because even men who master fluid timing perfectly sometimes still wake at 2 in the morning. Why? Because water timing is only the outer layer of the problem. Beneath it, deeper systems continue operating. Temperature, circulation, digestion, fluid redistribution, gravity itself. And one of the next hidden mistakes quietly amplifies all of those systems at once, especially after dinner. A mistake most men repeat every evening while believing they are eating completely normally. A mistake most men repeat every evening while believing they are eating completely normally. But before we move deeper into food, temperature, and circulation, we need to pause on one of the most powerful adjustments many men can make almost immediately. A simple timing rule. Not complicated, not expensive, not extreme, yet surprisingly effective once you understand the biology behind it. I call it the 3-hour rule. And if you remember only one idea from tonight's conversation so far, this may already begin changing your sleep. The rule itself is simple. Stop drinking all liquids at least 3 hours before sleep, not 30 minutes before bed, not just one tiny sip before lying down, not only half a cup, 3 full hours. Now, at first, this sounds excessive to some people, especially if they've spent years believing the problem is only about volume. They think, surely a small drink 1 hour before bed can't matter that much. But now you already understand why the body doesn't work that way, because the body operates through delayed processing. Timing, absorption, circulation, hormonal coordination, not instant cause and effect. So let's slow down and look carefully at what actually happens after you drink something at night. Imagine it's 9 o'clock in the evening. A man finishes a small glass of water while watching television. Nothing dramatic. Maybe half a glass, maybe a little herbal tea, maybe warm lemon water because someone told him it helps sleep. Again, harmless on the surface. Then around 10:30, he goes to bed. And because he emptied his bladder before sleep, he feels confident. Everything seems under control, but beneath the surface, the body is still working through that fluid. First, the liquid sits temporarily inside the stomach and digestive system. Then, absorption begins gradually through the intestines. The fluid enters the bloodstream. Circulation distributes it. Blood volume shifts slightly. Now the kidneys detect the increased fluid availability. And this is where the timing becomes incredibly important, because the kidneys are always monitoring the bloodstream, always, minute by minute, second by second. The moment fluid volume rises, filtration increases, not violently, not instantly, gradually, quietly. And that process takes time. For many people, roughly 3 hours, sometimes slightly less, sometimes slightly more. But very often, the peak effect lands directly in the middle of the night. Now suddenly the infamous 2 a.m. wake-up begins making eerie biological sense. The body is not randomly attacking sleep. The kidneys are simply completing a process that started hours earlier. That's why the 3-hour rule matters so much. It creates separation between fluid processing and deep sleep. You're giving the kidneys time to finish most of their work before the body enters its most restorative sleep cycles. And honestly, this single adjustment surprises many men with how powerful it can be. Because for years they focused only on reducing quantity, while completely ignoring timing. Now let's go even deeper. Remember the 3 questions we introduced earlier tonight? Why does nighttime urination happen around the same hour repeatedly? Why does it continue even with small amounts of fluid? And why do normal habits secretly make the problem worse? The 3-hour rule begins answering all 3 at once. Because nighttime biology is highly rhythmic. Your body does not simply shut off during sleep. It transitions through carefully timed physiological states. Hormones shift, core temperature changes, blood pressure changes, kidney behavior changes. And when fluid absorption overlaps with those nighttime transitions, the likelihood of awakening increases dramatically. Now think about how many people accidentally create this overlap every evening. Late dinners, late tea, late hydration, late desserts, late night supplements with water. Modern life pushes fluid intake later and later into the evening, especially for busy adults. And because many men spend daytime slightly dehydrated from work, stress, coffee, or constant activity, they unconsciously compensate at night. That pattern becomes extremely common. Minimal hydration during the day, then gradual drinking throughout the evening, which means the kidneys remain active deeper into the night. Now here's another fascinating detail. The body doesn't just respond to pure water. Soup, tea, fruit, alcohol, late-night snacks with high water content all contribute to nighttime fluid processing. And the kidneys don't care whether the liquid arrived through tea or soup or cucumber slices. Fluid is fluid. Processing still happens. Now, this does not mean men should become obsessive. That's important. The goal is awareness, not anxiety. Because once people become frightened of drinking water entirely, they create new problems. And dehydration can actually worsen sleep quality too. Dry mouth, higher heart rate, poor circulation, nighttime discomfort, headaches, restlessness. The body thrives on balance, not extremes. That's why the 3-hour rule works so well psychologically, too. It's realistic, gentle, sustainable. You are not banning hydration. You are shifting hydration earlier, where the body handles it more efficiently. Morning, afternoon, early evening, then gradually reducing intake later at night. This aligns beautifully with natural circadian biology. And here's where the story becomes even more interesting, because once fluid timing improves, another hidden system suddenly becomes easier to notice: the hormonal system, especially ADH, the hormone whose entire job is helping humans stay asleep through the night. Now imagine what happens biologically when the body enters sleep properly. Darkness arrives, melatonin rises, core temperature drops slightly, ADH increases. The kidneys receive a powerful nighttime message: conserve fluid, reduce urine production, protect deep sleep. It's an elegant system, a beautifully coordinated survival mechanism. But when fresh fluid keeps entering circulation too close to bedtime, the kidneys receive competing instructions. The hormonal system says, slow down, but the bloodstream says, more fluid has arrived. So the kidneys continue filtering. Now the body drifts toward midnight, carrying unfinished fluid processing into the deepest part of the night. And somewhere around 1 or 2 in the morning, the bladder finally reaches its threshold. That's when the man wakes suddenly, convinced the problem came out of nowhere. But biologically, the process began hours earlier. This is why understanding timing changes everything. Once you see the delayed chain reaction, nighttime awakening stops feeling mysterious. Now let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever had nights where you felt completely fine before bed, then suddenly woke up with a painfully full bladder even though you barely drank anything? That experience confuses many people, but now you understand why. The body was still processing, still filtering, still redistributing, still responding. And here's something even stranger. Many men who apply the 3-hour rule for several nights suddenly realize something unexpected. They sleep deeper emotionally, too. Why? Because the brain slowly stops anticipating interruption. Remember earlier when we discussed sleep anxiety? That subtle subconscious fear of waking again? When nighttime awakenings decrease, the nervous system relaxes. Sleep becomes less defensive. The body trusts the night again. That emotional shift matters enormously, because good sleep is not only physical, it's neurological, hormonal, psychological, everything connected. But even after mastering the 3-hour rule, some men still continue waking during the night. Why? Because fluid timing is only the first layer. Beneath it lies another hidden trigger, one that quietly begins during dinner itself. A trigger involving digestion, metabolism, and certain foods that secretly push the kidneys into overdrive while a man sleeps peacefully unaware. A trigger involving digestion, metabolism, and certain foods that secretly push the kidneys into overdrive while a man sleeps peacefully unaware. But before we move there, we need to understand one of the most important hidden guardians of human sleep. A tiny hormone with an enormous responsibility. A hormone quietly working every night to protect your rest. Its name is ADH, antidiuretic hormone. And despite the complicated medical name, its mission is beautifully simple. ADH helps your body hold on to water during sleep, so you do not need to wake up constantly to urinate. In other words, ADH is one of the body's nighttime protectors, a silent guardian of deep sleep. Most people have never heard of it, yet every healthy night of uninterrupted sleep depends on it. Now pause and think about how extraordinary this really is. For thousands of years, humans survived because the body evolved systems that allowed sleep to continue safely through the night. Imagine ancient humans waking every hour to urinate while sleeping outdoors in dangerous environments. That would have been disastrous. Sleep needed protection, so the body developed intelligent biological strategies, and ADH became one of them. When darkness falls and healthy sleep begins, ADH levels naturally rise. This hormonal rise sends an important message to the kidneys: slow urine production, conserve water, allow the body to rest. It's an elegant system. During the daytime, your kidneys operate more actively because humans are awake, moving, sweating, eating, drinking, and interacting with the environment. But nighttime is different. Nighttime is for restoration, repair, hormonal recovery, memory processing, immune regulation, nervous system healing. and excessive urination would constantly interrupt those critical processes. So ADH helps reduce urine output during sleep. Now here's where things become fascinating. Many men unknowingly interfere with this system every single night, not intentionally, not because they are unhealthy, but because modern habits confuse ancient biology. Late night hydration is one of the biggest examples. Remember earlier when we discussed how the body processes fluids over several hours? Now combine that delayed fluid processing with the hormonal timing of ADH. Suddenly the entire picture becomes much clearer. Imagine the body preparing for sleep. Melatonin begins rising, core temperature slowly decreases, the nervous system starts shifting toward nighttime recovery mode, and alongside all of this, ADH begins increasing. The body is preparing for conservation, preparing for deep, uninterrupted sleep. Then suddenly, at 10 o'clock at night, a large amount of fluid enters the system. Or sometimes not even a large amount, just enough. Enough to increase blood fluid levels, enough for the kidneys to notice. Now the body receives conflicting instructions. One system says it's nighttime, slow down. Another says fresh fluid has arrived, begin processing. And the kidneys, incredibly sensitive organs that they are, respond immediately to fluid conditions. This is where many men unknowingly trap themselves in daytime mode during the night. Biologically speaking, the body remains partially activated for fluid management instead of fully transitioning into conservation mode. The kidneys continue filtering aggressively. Urine production remains elevated, and several hours later, the bladder becomes full enough to interrupt sleep. Now suddenly, waking at 2 in the morning no longer feels random. It becomes predictable, a delayed consequence of overlapping biological signals. And this overlap becomes even more important with aging, because as men grow older, the nighttime rise in ADH may naturally become weaker, not absent, not broken, just less powerful than before. That means the body becomes more vulnerable to late-night habits that disrupt fluid regulation. In younger years, the body compensates more easily. A late cup of tea might not matter much, but over time, the system becomes more sensitive, more dependent on timing, more dependent on rhythm. This is why many men suddenly notice nighttime urination increasing in middle age, even though their lifestyle seems unchanged. The biology underneath the lifestyle has changed, and that realization is incredibly important, because many men blame themselves unnecessarily. They think, my body is failing, I'm getting old, something must be seriously wrong. But often, the body is still functioning intelligently. It's simply responding to conflicting signals with reduced hormonal flexibility. That's a very different story. Now here's another detail that surprises many people. Poor sleep itself can further weaken ADH effectiveness, which creates a vicious cycle. Fragmented sleep reduces hormonal coordination. Reduced hormonal coordination increases nighttime urine production. More nighttime urination further fragments sleep. Round and round the cycle goes. And over time, the nervous system starts anticipating interruption. Some men even begin waking before the bladder is truly full. The brain becomes hyper-alert to bladder sensations because it expects disturbance. This is where physiology and psychology begin intertwining in fascinating ways. The body remembers patterns, especially nighttime patterns. Now think back to one of the earlier questions we opened tonight. Why do men often wake at nearly the same hour? Part of the answer lies here. Hormones operate rhythmically, not randomly. ADH follows circadian timing. Kidney filtration follows circadian timing. Body temperature follows circadian timing. Your body is essentially running an internal nighttime schedule, and when late hydration disrupts that schedule, the consequences often appear during predictable windows of the night, especially around 1 to 3 in the morning. Now there's something beautifully reassuring about understanding this, because mystery creates fear. But mechanisms create clarity. Once you understand the hormonal process, nighttime awakening feels less chaotic, less personal, less mysterious. You begin seeing cause and effect, timing and consequence, and sometimes that understanding alone reduces stress surrounding sleep, which matters tremendously, because anxiety itself changes nighttime hormone balance too. Now let's go even deeper. Imagine 2 different men. The first man drinks most of his water earlier in the day, gradually reduces intake after dinner, sleeps in a cool, comfortable environment, maintains relatively stable sleep timing. The second man stays busy all day, barely hydrates, then drinks large amounts during the evening, consumes tea before bed, sleeps in an overheated room, stays on bright screens late into the night. Both men may technically consume similar total amounts of water, but hormonally, their bodies experience completely different nights. The first body transitions smoothly into conservation mode. The second body remains physiologically stimulated deep into the evening. Same water quantity, different timing, different hormonal coordination, different sleep outcomes. That distinction changes how we think about hydration entirely. And honestly, this is one reason simplistic sleep advice often fails people, because biology is layered, interconnected, timing sensitive, not mechanical. Now here's where tonight's mystery becomes even more intriguing. Even when ADH functions properly, there are still certain evening behaviors capable of overwhelming the system. Behaviors that increase fluid burden so dramatically that the kidneys continue working heavily despite hormonal attempts to slow them down. And one of the biggest hidden triggers begins not in the bedroom, but at the dinner table itself, especially during heavy evening meals that seem completely normal on the surface. But before we step into the hidden traps inside dinner itself, we need to clear up one extremely important misunderstanding. Because whenever people hear advice about reducing nighttime urination, many immediately make the same mistake. They start fearing water. They begin drinking less and less throughout the entire day. And ironically, that can make the body even more stressed, even more dysregulated, even more exhausted. So let me say this very clearly. The goal is not to deprive your body of hydration. The goal is to teach your body when hydration should happen. That distinction changes everything. This is not about drinking less. It's about drinking smarter. And once men understand this shift, they often feel immediate relief psychologically, because extreme restriction creates anxiety. Nobody wants to spend the day thirsty and uncomfortable just to avoid waking up at night. That approach is unsustainable. The body needs water. The brain needs water. Circulation needs water. The kidneys themselves need healthy hydration. The issue is timing. Always timing. Now imagine the body as a city with different traffic patterns throughout the day. Morning is active. Afternoon is productive. Nighttime is recovery and maintenance. If massive traffic suddenly appears during the quietest maintenance hours of the night, the whole system becomes disrupted. That's essentially what late hydration does to the kidneys. It creates unnecessary nighttime workload. So instead of restricting hydration altogether, we shift most hydration earlier into the body's natural active phase. Morning, afternoon, early evening. This aligns beautifully with human circadian biology. And honestly, the body responds remarkably well when hydration timing matches natural rhythms. Now think about how many men accidentally do the exact opposite. They wake up already rushed. Coffee replaces water. Work begins immediately. Meetings, driving, stress, phone calls, hours pass. The body quietly becomes mildly dehydrated. Not severe dehydration necessarily, just enough. Enough for the nervous system to feel slightly strained. Enough for energy to fluctuate. Enough for thirst to build slowly underneath awareness. Then evening finally arrives. The body relaxes. Hunger appears, thirst appears, and suddenly fluid intake increases dramatically. Water with dinner, tea after dinner, another drink while watching television, another sip before bed. Now the kidneys inherit a massive delayed workload right before sleep, and the body pays for it at 2 in the morning. This pattern is incredibly common in modern life. Not because people are careless, because modern schedules disconnect humans from natural biological rhythms. Now here's something fascinating. When hydration shifts earlier into the day, several things often improve simultaneously. Not just nighttime urination. Energy stabilizes, circulation improves, digestion improves, headaches decrease, fatigue decreases, and perhaps most importantly, the nervous system begins relaxing at night instead of continuing active fluid management. That matters enormously for sleep quality, because deep sleep depends on physiological calmness. Now let's walk through what healthy hydration timing often looks like in practical terms. Morning becomes the foundation. After waking, the body naturally benefits from replenishment because breathing and metabolism during sleep gradually reduce fluid levels overnight. This is the perfect time for generous hydration. The kidneys are alert. Circulation is active. The body is preparing for daytime activity. Then throughout the afternoon, hydration continues steadily. Not obsessively, not forcefully, just consistently. Small regular intake works beautifully because it prevents large evening thirst from developing later. Now evening arrives. Dinner happens. And this is where the gradual shift begins. Not sudden restriction, gradual reduction. The body begins preparing for nighttime biology. Kidney workload should begin decreasing. Hormonal nighttime signaling should begin strengthening. Then after dinner, fluid intake tapers naturally. Not because water is dangerous, but because the body needs time to process before deep sleep begins. That's the real secret. Not deprivation, preparation. Preparing the kidneys for rest, preparing hormones for conservation mode, preparing sleep cycles for stability. Now here's another important point many men overlook. Drinking large amounts quickly is much harder on nighttime regulation than spreading hydration gradually throughout the day. The kidneys can handle steady daytime processing beautifully, but sudden evening surges create delayed nighttime consequences. Again, timing, always timing. Now let's return to ADH for a moment, because once hydration timing improves, this hormone often functions more effectively too. Remember, ADH rises naturally during sleep to reduce urine production. But if the body enters nighttime already overloaded with incoming fluid, the hormonal signal becomes harder to maintain. It's like trying to slow traffic while new cars continue flooding onto the highway. The system becomes conflicted. However, when hydration happens primarily earlier in the day, nighttime hormonal coordination becomes smoother. The kidneys finally receive a clear message: nighttime has arrived. And that clarity matters. The body thrives on predictable rhythms. Humans evolved around cycles: light and darkness, activity and rest, feeding and fasting, hydration and conservation. Modern habits often blur those boundaries, but the biology underneath still follows ancient patterns. Now here's something emotionally important too. Many men become discouraged after trying random sleep advice that fails. They think, I already tried drinking less. I already tried avoiding water. Nothing works, but often they were solving the wrong problem. They focused on total quantity instead of timing distribution. That's a completely different approach. And small timing adjustments are often far easier to maintain long-term than extreme restriction. That's why sustainable habits matter more than dramatic short-term changes. The body loves consistency, especially sleep biology. Now think back again to those 3 core mysteries we opened tonight. Why does nighttime urination happen repeatedly around the same hour? Why does it continue even with small drinks? And why do normal evening habits secretly make it worse? At this point, the puzzle is starting to come together. Fluid timing overlaps with hormonal timing. Hormonal timing overlaps with kidney filtration. Kidney filtration overlaps with sleep cycles. Everything connected, and we still haven't uncovered the full picture yet. Because even men who hydrate perfectly can still sabotage sleep through another hidden mechanism, one that begins during digestion itself. A mechanism involving food, metabolism, circulation, and something surprisingly called metabolic water. And once you understand how dinner quietly influences nighttime kidney activity, you may never look at late meals the same way again. And once you understand how dinner quietly influences nighttime kidney activity, you may never look at late meals the same way again. Because for many men, the real problem does not begin with the bladder. It begins at the dinner table. Now this surprises people. Most men already know caffeine can increase urination. Most know alcohol can disturb sleep. But very few realize that an ordinary heavy dinner can quietly create the perfect biological conditions for waking up at 2 in the morning, even without drinking much water at all. And once again, the body is not malfunctioning. It is responding logically to workload, because digestion is not a passive activity. A large evening meal triggers an enormous physiological operation inside the body. Blood flow changes, hormones change, temperature changes, metabolism changes, fluid balance changes, and the kidneys eventually become involved in all of it. Now imagine a typical evening. A man comes home exhausted after a long day. Dinner becomes the first real moment of comfort. So naturally, the meal becomes large. Extra meat, heavy sauces, fried foods, late-night snacks, rich desserts, nothing unusual. In fact, Many people consider this normal relaxation after a stressful day. But biologically, the body now enters a highly active digestive state precisely when it should gradually be preparing for sleep recovery. And that creates conflict, because heavy digestion requires enormous energy. The stomach and intestines suddenly demand increased blood supply. The digestive organs become metabolically active. The nervous system shifts resources toward processing food. Now, here's where things become fascinating. When digestion intensifies, the body also produces something many people have never heard of before: metabolic water. In simple terms, digestion itself creates additional fluid inside the body, especially when processing proteins, fats, and complex meals. That means even if a man barely drinks any water at night, his body may still generate significant fluid internally through digestion and metabolism. Now suddenly, another mystery begins making sense. Why do some men wake up to urinate after heavy dinners, even when they didn't drink much? Because the kidneys are not responding only to beverages. They are responding to total fluid balance inside the body, including internally generated metabolic fluid. That's the hidden trap. And honestly, once men understand this mechanism, many begin recognizing patterns they never noticed before. Think about it carefully. How many times has nighttime urination happened after a large steak dinner, fried foods, late-night barbecue, rich restaurant meals, heavy family gatherings, or oversized portions eaten close to bedtime? The connection often hides in plain sight. But because digestion happens gradually over hours, most people never link dinner to waking at 2 in the morning. Again, delayed consequences. The body is full of them. Now let's go deeper. Protein-heavy meals are especially demanding metabolically. The body must break proteins down into amino acids. Waste products increase. Kidney filtration activity rises. Meanwhile, high-fat meals slow digestion significantly. Food remains in the digestive system longer. Metabolic activity continues deeper into the night. Body temperature stays elevated longer. An elevated body temperature itself can interfere with deep sleep quality. Now, multiple systems are colliding simultaneously: digestion, fluid regulation, temperature regulation, hormonal timing, kidney workload, all while the body is supposedly trying to enter restorative sleep. This is why some men feel strangely internally active after heavy dinners. Their bodies are literally still working hard. Now add late timing into the equation. This is where the situation becomes even more disruptive. A heavy meal eaten at 6 in the evening affects the body very differently than the same meal eaten at 9:30 at night. Why? Because timing determines whether digestion overlaps with sleep cycles. The closer a meal occurs to bedtime, the more likely nighttime biological systems become disrupted. Digestion competes with recovery. The kidneys inherit delayed metabolic workload. ADH signaling becomes less effective. Body temperature remains elevated. Circulation stays active. And several hours later, the bladder eventually announces the consequences. Now think again about the body's nighttime priorities. Sleep is supposed to be a recovery state, a low-activity physiological phase where repair processes dominate. But a massive late dinner forces the body into active processing mode instead, almost like asking factory workers to continue a second shift deep into the night. Something eventually pays the price, and often, that price becomes fragmented sleep. Now here's another subtle detail most men never notice. Heavy meals also influence thirst afterward. Salty foods, protein-heavy foods, greasy foods, all naturally increase fluid craving later in the evening. So a man not only generates more metabolic fluid internally, he often drinks more afterward too. Now the kidneys face a double burden: incoming fluid from drinks, plus internally generated fluid from digestion. The body becomes overwhelmed with nighttime processing demands. Again, not because the body is broken, because the body is obeying biological rules. Now let's return to the deeper emotional layer underneath all this. Many men spend years blaming aging alone, but often lifestyle timing patterns quietly amplify age-related sensitivity. The body becomes less forgiving over time. Late meals tolerated easily at 30 may create major sleep disruption at 50. Not because the body is weak, because biological recovery systems become more timing dependent. That distinction matters psychologically. Understanding creates empowerment, because timing can be adjusted. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed nights where you wake feeling unusually hot, thirsty, restless, with a heavy sensation in the stomach, and then suddenly need to urinate? That combination is not random. The body is still metabolically engaged, still processing, still redistributing, still filtering, and the kidneys eventually become part of that chain reaction. Now here's the beautiful part. Small changes often produce surprisingly large improvements. Not starvation, not rigid dieting, just spacing dinner earlier, reducing excessive heaviness at night, allowing digestion to finish before deep sleep begins. Simple adjustments, but biologically powerful ones. And interestingly, many men notice improved sleep depth even before nighttime urination fully improves, because the body finally receives permission to enter recovery mode properly. That's the true goal here. Not merely holding urine longer. The goal is aligning the body with nighttime biology, helping the body do what it was naturally designed to do. Now remember, we are still only uncovering the outer layers of this mystery, because even healthy foods can secretly stimulate the kidneys in ways most people never suspect. Certain vegetables, certain evening snacks, certain healthy habits. Some of the very foods people believe are helping them sleep may quietly be increasing nighttime urine production instead. Some of the very foods people believe are helping them sleep may quietly be increasing nighttime urine production instead. But before we uncover those hidden dietary triggers, we need to fully understand one of the strangest concepts in nighttime biology. A concept most people have never heard before: metabolic water, or what we might simply call internally generated fluid. Now, at first, this idea sounds almost unbelievable. How can the body create fluid if a person barely drank anything? And yet, it happens constantly, every single day. Because digestion is not only about breaking food down for energy. Digestion is chemistry, transformation, conversion. The body is continuously extracting nutrients, releasing energy, and creating byproducts through metabolism. And one of those byproducts is water itself. Now think carefully about how surprising this really is. Most people imagine urine coming only from what they drink. But the kidneys do not care whether fluid entered through a glass or was generated internally through digestion and metabolism. Fluid is fluid, and the kidneys monitor all of it. This explains one of the most confusing experiences many men have. The nights where they say, "But I barely drank anything," and yet they still wake up at 2 in the morning needing to urinate. That experience feels mysterious until you understand metabolic water. Now suddenly the puzzle begins fitting together. Imagine a large evening meal rich in protein and fat. The digestive system becomes highly active. Chemical reactions intensify. Nutrients break down. Energy production increases. And throughout this process, fluid is generated inside the body. That internally produced fluid eventually enters circulation. Then, just like ordinary hydration, the bloodstream carries it, the kidneys detect it, filtration increases, and urine production follows. Now notice what's happening psychologically. Many men blame the wrong thing because they only remember beverages. They remember, "I skipped tea. I didn't drink soda. I avoided water before bed." But they overlook the massive metabolic workload happening silently after dinner. And because the process unfolds gradually over several hours, the connection becomes nearly invisible. Again, delayed biology, the hidden theme underneath almost every nighttime awakening. Now here's where the story becomes even more fascinating. Digestion itself requires fluid movement throughout the body. The stomach secretes digestive juices. The intestines shift fluid. Nutrients move across membranes. Circulation increases around digestive organs. The body becomes a dynamic fluid processing system after large meals, especially late at night. This means nighttime urination is often not merely a bladder issue. It's an entire full-body metabolic event, and the kidneys sit at the center of the cleanup process. Now think about the elegance of the human body for a moment. The kidneys are constantly protecting internal balance. Too much fluid? They remove it. Too little fluid? They conserve it. Extra metabolic waste? They filter it. Everything is about equilibrium, survival, balance, which means nighttime urination often represents the body trying to restore stability, not malfunctioning randomly. That distinction changes how people emotionally experience symptoms, because fear decreases when mechanisms become understandable. Now let's go deeper into why evening meals matter so much. During daytime hours, the body has abundant time to process digestion and fluid shifts while you remain awake and active. Circulation changes naturally. Kidney activity stays appropriate for daytime. Hormonal systems remain in active mode. But nighttime is different. Nighttime biology is supposed to shift toward conservation and restoration. ADH rises, core temperature decreases, metabolism gradually slows, kidney output decreases, but a heavy late meal interrupts this transition. The body remains metabolically stimulated deep into the night. And one consequence of that stimulation is continued fluid generation and redistribution. Now suddenly, waking up despite not drinking much no longer seems mysterious. The body itself created additional fluid internally. Now let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever had a night where dinner felt unusually heavy and several hours later you woke feeling bloated, warm, thirsty, and needing to urinate? That combination is extremely revealing. The body was still processing intensely during hours meant for recovery. And here's another important detail. Protein-heavy meals often amplify this effect. Because protein metabolism generates nitrogen waste products the kidneys must process and eliminate. This increases renal workload. Meanwhile, salty foods increase fluid retention temporarily, followed later by fluid redistribution and thirst. Then the body tries restoring equilibrium overnight. Again, the kidneys inherit the burden. Now think about modern dinner culture for a moment. Late restaurant meals, large portions, high sodium, heavy sauces, nighttime snacking while watching screens. Modern evenings often create the exact opposite conditions human nighttime biology evolved around, and yet many men assume the resulting awakenings are simply normal aging. But often, the body is responding rationally to modern metabolic overload occurring at biologically inappropriate times. Now here's where things become even more subtle. Some men begin drinking less and less water trying to fix nighttime urination while continuing heavy late dinners. So dehydration increases during the day, but nighttime kidney workload continues anyway because digestion itself keeps generating fluid and metabolic waste. This is why simplistic solutions often fail. The body is multidimensional. Everything connects. Food timing, hydration timing, hormones, circulation, temperature, sleep depth, kidney activity. And the more these systems become misaligned, the more fragile sleep becomes. Now there's also an emotional side to this cycle. Many exhausted men start fearing bedtime itself. They anticipate interruption. They expect the bathroom trip. They become hyper-aware of bladder sensations. And interestingly, anticipation alone can make nighttime awakenings happen more easily. Because lighter sleep increases sensitivity to internal signals, the body becomes vigilant instead of deeply restorative. That's why understanding physiology matters so much. Clarity calms the nervous system. Now imagine 2 different nights. On one night, early balanced dinner, lighter portions, steady daytime hydration, minimal late night intake. On another, large heavy dinner, late digestion, high sodium, late fluids, metabolic activation continuing past midnight. The kidneys experience 2 completely different biological environments, even if the actual amount of water consumed appears similar. That's the hidden power of metabolic timing. And honestly, once men understand this concept, they often begin noticing dramatic patterns in their own lives almost immediately. Certain meals, certain evenings, certain restaurant foods, the body starts revealing its rhythms. Now remember, we still haven't reached the deepest hidden mechanism yet. We are gradually descending layer by layer through the body's nighttime systems. And next, we uncover something even more surprising. Because some foods considered incredibly healthy, vegetables, salads, nighttime snacks, can secretly behave like natural diuretics, quietly stimulating the kidneys while men believe they are making healthy choices before bed. Quietly stimulating the kidneys while men believe they are making healthy choices before bed. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because most men already know the obvious culprits. Coffee, alcohol, energy drinks. Those are easy. People expect them to interfere with sleep and urination, but the body is far more subtle than that. Some of the foods quietly increasing nighttime urination are foods most people associate with health, cleanliness, and good habits. And that's exactly why they become dangerous at night, because nobody suspects them. Now think about the psychology behind healthy evening eating. A man decides he wants to improve his health. So instead of junk food, he prepares a light, healthy dinner. A fresh salad, some cucumber slices, maybe celery, maybe asparagus, maybe colorful bell peppers. It feels disciplined, responsible, clean. And during daytime hours, many of these foods are indeed excellent choices. But nighttime biology changes the equation because some healthy foods naturally stimulate urine production. Not aggressively, not like medication, but enough to matter when combined with sleep biology, fluid timing, and nighttime kidney sensitivity. Now suddenly, the body receives another hidden signal pushing fluid toward the bladder during the night, and the man never connects the dots. Again, hidden cause and delayed effect, the recurring theme beneath this entire mystery. Let's begin with celery. Celery is widely praised for hydration and mineral content, and it absolutely deserves many of those compliments. But celery also contains natural compounds that mildly stimulate kidney activity. At the same time, celery contains a tremendous amount of water, so when eaten late at night, especially in large quantities, it quietly increases fluid burden. Not enough to bother the body during active daytime hours, but enough to matter during sleep. Now consider cucumber. Cucumber seems harmless, refreshing, light, cooling. Many people even eat cucumber specifically because it feels gentle before bed. But cucumber is extremely water-rich, and when combined with late timing, the kidneys eventually must process that fluid. Now imagine someone eating a large evening salad filled with cucumber, celery, and dressing late at night while also drinking tea. Individually, each choice seems small, but biologically, the cumulative effect becomes significant, especially after midnight. Now let's talk about asparagus. Asparagus has long been known for its natural diuretic effects. Many people notice subtle urinary changes after eating it. Again, perfectly manageable during daytime. But at night, when the body is attempting to reduce urine production through ADH signaling, asparagus can push gently in the opposite direction. This creates another layer of nighttime conflict. The hormonal system says, conserve fluid. Meanwhile, dietary signals quietly encourage increased filtration. Now the kidneys receive mixed instructions again. And several hours later, sleep suffers. Bell peppers can contribute too, especially because many nighttime vegetable dishes contain high water content overall. Again, none of these foods are bad. This conversation is not about fear, it's about timing and context. A food beneficial during the day may become disruptive late at night, depending on how the body processes it. Biology is contextual. Now, here's where things become even more interesting. Many men intentionally switch from heavier foods to salads at night because they think lighter meals automatically improve sleep. Sometimes they do. But large raw vegetable meals can also create unexpected digestive and fluid processing activity. Raw foods often digest more slowly for some individuals. Fiber changes intestinal fluid dynamics. Water-rich vegetables increase fluid load. And because the meal feels light, people often eat it closer to bedtime without caution. Then hours later, the bladder quietly announces the consequences. Now think about how confusing this becomes emotionally. A man believes he is making healthier choices. He replaces junk food with vegetables. He drinks herbal tea instead of soda. Yet, nighttime awakenings continue, or sometimes worsen. Naturally, frustration builds, because the hidden issue was never about healthy versus unhealthy. It was about biological timing. That distinction changes everything. Now let's connect this to the deeper nighttime systems we've already uncovered. Late hydration overlaps with ADH timing. Heavy digestion creates metabolic water. Certain foods stimulate kidney activity naturally. All these small factors accumulate together, and the kidneys must eventually process the combined result. That's why nighttime urination is rarely caused by one single thing. It's usually a layered chain reaction, a biological domino effect. Now here's another subtle detail many people overlook. Water-rich foods often feel less psychologically dangerous than beverages. A man may carefully avoid drinking water before bed, while unknowingly consuming enormous fluid amounts through food itself. Soup, fruit, salads, vegetables. The brain doesn't register these the same way it registers drinking a glass of water. But physiologically, fluids still enter circulation. The kidneys still respond. Now imagine this scenario. Dinner at 9 o'clock. Large salad, cucumber, celery, bell peppers, light dressing, a cup of herbal tea afterward. The meal feels almost ideal psychologically. Healthy, light, responsible. But by 1 or 2 in the morning, the body is still processing. Digestive fluid shifts, water absorption, kidney stimulation, circulatory redistribution. Then comes the awakening. Now suddenly the mystery deepens, because many nighttime triggers disguise themselves as healthy behavior, and that's why understanding mechanisms matters more than blindly following generic advice. Now, let's pause for a moment and revisit the three deeper questions running underneath tonight's conversation. Why does the body keep waking at the same strange hour? Why does it happen even without obvious excess drinking? And why do normal healthy habits sometimes quietly worsen the problem? At this point, the answers are beginning to intertwine beautifully. The body responds to total nighttime workload, not isolated actions, timing, fluid distribution, digestion, hormones, temperature, circulation, everything layered together. And there's still another hidden trigger waiting beneath the surface, one many men dismiss completely. Spicy food. Most people think of spicy food as a stomach issue, or maybe an acid reflux issue. But surprisingly, spicy foods can also irritate the bladder itself. And for certain men, that irritation becomes one more invisible spark capable of pulling the brain out of deep sleep in the middle of the night. And for certain men, that irritation becomes one more invisible spark capable of pulling the brain out of deep sleep in the middle of the night. Because the bladder is not simply a passive storage bag. It is sensitive, reactive, deeply connected to the nervous system. And what irritates the bladder does not always have to increase urine volume dramatically in order to wake someone from sleep. Sometimes irritation alone is enough. That distinction matters enormously. Many men assume nighttime urination is only about how full the bladder becomes. But sometimes the issue is how sensitive the bladder becomes, and spicy food can quietly amplify that sensitivity. Now think about how the body reacts after a very spicy meal. First, heat receptors activate throughout the mouth and digestive tract. The nervous system responds. Circulation changes. Body temperature shifts slightly. Sweating may increase. But for some individuals, irritation does not stop in the stomach. Certain compounds from spicy foods eventually affect the urinary tract as well. And when the bladder lining becomes slightly irritated, the brain interprets bladder signals differently. Suddenly, even moderate urine volume may feel urgent. Now imagine this happening during vulnerable nighttime sleep cycles. The bladder does not necessarily need to be extremely full anymore. The nervous system becomes more reactive to sensation itself. And once sleep becomes lighter, awakening becomes easier. This explains something many men experience without fully understanding. Some nights, they wake up feeling an urgent need to urinate, yet when they actually go to the bathroom, the volume seems surprisingly small. That experience feels confusing. But irritation changes perception. The bladder becomes more talkative, more demanding, more likely to interrupt sleep before reaching true fullness. Now here's something fascinating. Spicy food often overlaps with many other nighttime triggers simultaneously. Late dinners, heavy meals, alcohol, salty foods, all layered together. Now the body becomes physiologically stimulated at precisely the wrong time. Remember, nighttime biology is supposed to move toward calmness and conservation. Core temperature gently decreases. Hormonal systems stabilize. The nervous system quiets. But spicy foods can partially push the body in the opposite direction. More stimulation, more heat, more circulation, more sensory activation. Now imagine a man eating spicy food late in the evening while already dealing with mild nighttime bladder sensitivity. Then he drinks water afterward because the meal makes him thirsty. Then perhaps he eats cucumber salad because it feels cooling and healthy. Now multiple hidden triggers begin stacking quietly together. Fluid increase, kidney stimulation, bladder irritation, delayed digestion, and somewhere around 2 in the morning, sleep collapses again. Now suddenly the body's behavior stops feeling random. Patterns begin emerging. This is why generic sleep advice fails so many people, because one individual may respond mostly to hydration timing, while another reacts more strongly to bladder irritation or food sensitivity. The body is deeply individual. Now let's talk about the nervous system side of this story for a moment. The bladder communicates continuously with the brain. Tiny sensory signals travel constantly through nerves. Most of the time, the brain filters those signals quietly in the background, especially during deep sleep. But when irritation exists, the signals become louder, more urgent, more difficult for the sleeping brain to ignore. And once the brain wakes even slightly, Awareness increases rapidly. Then comes the familiar cycle: eyes opening, checking the clock, seeing 2:07 a.m., feeling frustration immediately. Now stress hormones rise. Sleep becomes even lighter. Returning to sleep becomes harder. This is one reason nighttime awakenings can feel disproportionately exhausting. The interruption is not only physical, it becomes emotional too. Now here's another subtle point many men never notice. Spicy foods may not affect them equally every night. That inconsistency makes identifying the trigger difficult. Why? Because irritation combines with all the other layers we've already explored: hydration timing, meal size, temperature, stress, sleep depth, circulation, ADH activity. On one night, spicy food alone may cause no obvious problem, but combined with late fluids and a heavy dinner, now the threshold gets crossed. This is why body awareness matters more than rigid rules. The goal is understanding patterns, not fearing food. And honestly, many men feel relieved hearing this because they realize their body is not broken. It's responding intelligently to cumulative biological stressors. Now let's return briefly to the idea of the healthy late-night snack. Imagine someone eating cucumber salad with spicy dressing late in the evening. Again, psychologically, it feels harmless, fresh, light, healthy. But physiologically, high water content increases fluid load, certain vegetables stimulate kidney activity, spices irritate bladder sensitivity, late timing overlaps with sleep hormone transitions. Suddenly, a healthy snack becomes a perfect recipe for nighttime awakening. Not because the food is evil, because the timing and biology collide. This distinction changes everything psychologically. When men stop viewing symptoms as punishment, they begin approaching the body with curiosity instead of frustration. And curiosity leads to better long-term habits. Now, there's another hidden layer here that becomes more important with age. As sleep naturally becomes lighter over time, the nervous system becomes easier to awaken from internal sensations. Minor bladder irritation that a younger body might sleep through completely can wake an older nervous system much more easily. Again, not failure. Sensitivity. The body becomes more responsive to disruption. This is why many men notice nighttime awakenings increasing gradually across the years, even when their habits appear relatively unchanged. Small triggers become amplified by changing sleep architecture, and once repeated awakenings begin, the brain starts anticipating them. This anticipation matters enormously, because expectation itself can fragment sleep. Some men eventually begin half-waking repeatedly through the night, simply checking whether they need to urinate. The nervous system becomes hypervigilant. Now the bladder no longer needs to be very full at all. The brain is already listening for it. That's why restoring deep, uninterrupted sleep requires calming multiple systems simultaneously: fluid balance, temperature, digestion, bladder sensitivity, nervous system tension, everything connected. And interestingly, one of the simplest ways to reduce nighttime digestive and bladder stress is not through medication at all. It's through meal timing. Because when dinner moves earlier, the body suddenly gains enough time to complete much of its processing before sleep even begins. And that simple shift can dramatically reduce the hidden nighttime burden placed on the kidneys, bladder, and nervous system together. And that simple shift can dramatically reduce the hidden nighttime burden placed on the kidneys, bladder, and nervous system together. Because the body loves preparation, it loves rhythm, predictability, gradual transitions. Human biology was never designed for massive stimulation immediately before sleep. Not heavy digestion, not large fluid processing, not metabolic overload. Nighttime is supposed to feel like a gentle descent, a slowing, a quieting. And dinner timing plays a far bigger role in that descent than most people realize. Now think about what happens when someone eats too close to bedtime. The body receives conflicting instructions again. The brain says, we are preparing for sleep, but digestion says, we are preparing for work. The stomach activates, circulation increases, body temperature rises slightly, hormonal signals shift, kidney workload eventually increases. Now recovery and processing collide with each other. And somewhere later in the night, sleep pays the price. That's why one of the simplest and most effective recommendations is this: finish dinner at least 3 to 4 hours before sleep whenever possible. Not because eating at night is morally wrong, not because the body suddenly stops working after sunset, but because the body needs processing time before entering deep restorative sleep. That time buffer matters enormously. It allows digestion to calm, fluid shifts to stabilize, temperature regulation to normalize, hormonal transitions to occur smoothly. In many ways, you are giving your biology permission to prepare for sleep properly. Now, here's something fascinating. Men who move dinner earlier often notice improvements long before they fully understand why. They may simply say, "I feel lighter at night. I don't wake up as much. My sleep feels deeper. I don't feel overheated anymore." That lighter sensation is physiologically real. The body is carrying less nighttime workload, and once nighttime workload decreases, the nervous system finally relaxes more deeply. Now, of course, modern life makes this difficult sometimes. Late work, family schedules, commutes, social dinners. Nobody lives inside a perfect laboratory, and this conversation is not about perfection. It's about moving gently toward better biological alignment whenever possible. Even shifting dinner 30 to 60 minutes earlier can help some people significantly. Small adjustments matter. Now let's talk about the type of dinner itself, because timing is only one layer. The structure of the meal matters too, especially vegetables. Now, this surprises people because vegetables are universally associated with health. And again, many vegetables are wonderful choices. But nighttime digestion is different from daytime digestion. Raw vegetables require more digestive effort for many individuals. They contain more intact fiber. They often carry higher water content. And large raw salads late at night can create prolonged digestive activity. That's why cooked vegetables often work better for evening meals. Cooking softens fiber structures. Digestion becomes gentler. The body processes the meal more smoothly. Now suddenly dinner becomes less metabolically demanding, less stimulating, less disruptive to sleep biology. This is one reason warm cooked foods often feel naturally calming in the evening. The body perceives them differently. Now think about foods like carrots. Cooked carrots provide warmth, fiber, nutrients, and steady energy without overwhelming digestion late at night. Or broccoli. When lightly cooked, broccoli becomes easier to digest while still supporting nutrition beautifully. Sweet potatoes are another fascinating example. Warm, comforting, steady. They provide satisfying fullness without the aggressive metabolic intensity of heavy, greasy meals. Now compare that to fried foods, spicy late-night meals, large raw salads, heavy restaurant dinners close to bedtime. The body experiences completely different nighttime conditions. And remember, the kidneys eventually inherit the consequences of whatever digestion creates. Now, here's another subtle point many people overlook. When dinner becomes lighter and earlier, late night thirst often decreases naturally too. Why? Because heavy salty meals frequently trigger additional evening drinking. The body becomes thirsty trying to process sodium and digestion. Then fluid intake increases. Then nighttime filtration increases. Then awakenings increase. But calmer evening meals reduce that entire chain reaction. Again, everything connects. Now let's revisit the deeper biological rhythm underneath all this. Humans evolved around daylight activity and nighttime recovery. Daytime, movement, eating, hydration, metabolism. Nighttime, repair, conservation, deep nervous system restoration. Modern habits blur those boundaries constantly. Bright lights, heavy late meals, screens, late stimulation, late fluids, and the body tries heroically to adapt. But eventually, symptoms emerge. Sometimes those symptoms appear as fragmented sleep, sometimes as repeated urination, sometimes as exhaustion the next morning. Now think carefully about how often men normalize these signs. They assume this is just adulthood, this is just stress, this is just aging. But many nighttime disruptions are actually conversations from the body, signals, requests for better alignment. And fortunately, the body often responds surprisingly quickly once those signals are understood. Now let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever noticed that some of your best nights of sleep happened almost accidentally? Maybe dinner was earlier, maybe the meal was simpler, maybe you stopped eating sooner without thinking about it. Then somehow, the night felt calmer. You slept deeper, you woke less, your body felt quieter. That was not random. The body was experiencing reduced nighttime conflict. And this becomes incredibly empowering once men begin recognizing patterns instead of blaming themselves. Now here's something emotionally important too. Many exhausted people attempt dramatic overcorrections, extreme fasting, severe restriction, fear of food, fear of drinking water. But sustainable health rarely comes from fear. It comes from cooperation with the body, gentle consistency, small intelligent shifts repeated daily. And honestly, that approach tends to produce more lasting improvement than harsh short-term discipline. Now remember, we are still descending deeper into the hidden architecture of nighttime awakening. So far, we've uncovered fluid timing, ADH, metabolic water, natural diuretic foods, bladder irritation, meal timing. But now we reach another surprisingly overlooked issue. One so simple that many men dismiss it completely. The way they urinate before bed. Because sometimes the bladder isn't waking a man at 2 in the morning because it filled too quickly. Sometimes it's because it was never fully emptied in the first place. Because sometimes the bladder isn't waking a man at 2 in the morning because it filled too quickly. Sometimes it's because it was never fully emptied in the first place. And this may be one of the simplest, yet most overlooked, causes of nighttime awakening. Not hormones, not temperature, not diet, just incomplete emptying. Now, at first glance, this sounds almost too simple to matter. Most men assume that once urine flow stops, the bladder must be empty. But the human bladder rarely works with perfect precision, especially at night, especially under stress, especially with aging. In reality, many men leave behind a surprising amount of residual urine without realizing it. Not huge amounts necessarily, but enough. Enough to shorten the time before the bladder reaches its next wake-up threshold. And once you understand this, a very common nighttime pattern suddenly makes sense. A man empties his bladder before bed. He feels relieved, comfortable, ready for sleep. Then just a few hours later, he wakes again needing to urinate. And afterward he thinks, how is that possible? I already went before bed. But what if the bladder never fully emptied to begin with? Now imagine the bladder like a container that starts the night already partially filled. Maybe only 10% remains. Maybe 15%. That doesn't sound dramatic. But overnight, the kidneys continue producing at least some urine no matter what. Even with excellent ADH function, even with good habits. The body never completely stops filtration. So if the bladder begins the night already carrying leftover volume, it reaches its limit much sooner. Now suddenly, the mysterious 2 a.m. awakening becomes easier to understand because the bladder didn't need to fill from zero. It only needed to finish what was already started. Now here's something fascinating. Modern life trains many men to urinate quickly, almost mechanically. Public restrooms, work schedules, stress, rushing, the body learns efficiency instead of relaxation. In many cases, men enter the bathroom with the mindset, finish fast and move on. But the bladder empties best when the nervous system feels relaxed and unhurried. That detail matters enormously, because urination is not purely mechanical, it is neurological. Muscles must coordinate, pelvic tension must release, the bladder must contract efficiently, the urinary sphincters must relax properly, and when the body remains tense or rushed, emptying becomes incomplete. Now think about bedtime specifically. Many men perform their final bathroom trip almost as an afterthought. Brush teeth, turn off lights, quickly urinate, climb into bed. But if the body remains hurried, residual urine often remains quietly behind. Again, not enough to feel obvious, but enough to matter later. Now here's where aging quietly enters the story too. As men grow older, bladder emptying efficiency may gradually decrease. Not necessarily because of disease, sometimes simply because tissues change, muscles change, nervous system coordination changes, and even tiny reductions in emptying efficiency can significantly affect nighttime sleep over time, especially when combined with late hydration, heavy dinners, temperature changes, lighter sleep architecture, or mild prostate enlargement. Everything layers together. Now remember the deeper pattern we've been uncovering tonight. Nighttime awakening rarely comes from one dramatic cause. It usually emerges from small biological disadvantages stacking quietly on top of each other. And incomplete bladder emptying is one of those hidden layers. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever gone to the bathroom at night, then only a short time later felt like you could urinate again? That sensation often confuses people, but it can reflect residual urine combined with bladder sensitivity. The bladder was never truly reset back to empty. Now the nervous system remains partially alert to bladder sensations throughout the night. And once sleep becomes lighter, those signals wake the brain more easily. Now here's another subtle detail. Many men unknowingly strain while urinating. especially when trying to finish faster. But excessive straining can actually increase pelvic floor tension instead of promoting smooth emptying. The body becomes mechanically forceful instead of neurologically relaxed. And relaxation is exactly what the bladder needs. This is why calmness matters even in something as ordinary as urination. The nervous system is involved in everything. Now think about how different the body feels when completely relaxed versus stressed. Muscles soften, breathing slows, circulation changes. The bladder responds to those states too. A calm nervous system empties more efficiently. A tense nervous system often leaves behind residual tension and residual urine. Now let's connect this back to sleep itself. Every interruption fragments sleep architecture. Even brief awakenings matter. Deep sleep cycles become shortened. Hormonal recovery becomes disrupted. Memory processing becomes fragmented. Morning fatigue increases. So even small reductions in nighttime awakenings can produce surprisingly dramatic improvements in overall sleep quality. This is why tiny habits matter. The body responds to cumulative effects. Now, emotionally, many men feel embarrassed discussing urination habits. They dismiss symptoms, ignore patterns, normalize discomfort. But the body communicates through patterns constantly. And paying attention early is far wiser than waiting until sleep becomes severely disrupted. Now, here's something reassuring. Incomplete emptying is often highly improvable, sometimes without medication, without complicated interventions, just through awareness, positioning, relaxation, timing, simple physiological cooperation. And honestly, many men are shocked by how much difference small changes can make once they stop rushing the process. Because the goal isn't merely going to the bathroom. The goal is helping the bladder truly finish its job before sleep begins. Now think again about the three deeper mysteries underneath tonight's conversation. Why does waking happen repeatedly around the same hour? Why does it continue even when hydration improves? And why do ordinary habits secretly amplify the problem? At this point, the answers are becoming increasingly interconnected. Residual urine shortens bladder capacity overnight. Lighter sleep increases bladder awareness. Delayed kidney filtration continues adding fluid. Nervous system tension amplifies sensitivity, everything woven together. And next, we uncover a remarkably simple technique many men have never heard of before. A small bedtime adjustment capable of helping the bladder empty more completely naturally. No medication, no equipment, just a different way of using the bathroom. One that quietly reduces residual urine and helps many men reclaim longer, uninterrupted sleep. No medication, no equipment, just a different way of using the bathroom. One that quietly reduces residual urine and helps many men reclaim longer, uninterrupted sleep. It's called double voiding. And despite sounding almost too simple, it can be surprisingly powerful because sometimes the body does not need a dramatic intervention. Sometimes it simply needs a second chance to finish what it already started. Now think about how most people urinate before bed. Quickly, automatically, without attention. The moment the urine stream slows down, they assume the bladder is empty. Then they flush, leave the bathroom, and climb into bed. But the bladder is not always perfectly synchronized, especially when the nervous system is tired, tense, distracted, or aging. Sometimes a small amount of urine remains trapped simply because the bladder and pelvic muscles did not fully coordinate, and that leftover volume matters much more overnight than people realize. This is where double voiding changes the equation. Instead of forcing the bladder aggressively, the technique works with physiology, calmly, gently, patiently. The first important shift is posture. Whenever possible, sit instead of stand. Now, this surprises many men because standing feels normal, fast, and efficient, but sitting often relaxes the pelvic floor more completely. The hips soften, abdominal tension decreases, the nervous system becomes calmer. And when pelvic muscles relax, bladder emptying improves naturally. Again, the body responds best to relaxation, not force. Now imagine the difference between rushing through the process versus allowing the body to fully release. That difference alone can change nighttime bladder volume significantly. Now, once seated, urinate normally. No straining, no pushing, no forcing. This part matters enormously because many men instinctively bear down trying to empty completely. But aggressive straining can actually create more pelvic tension. The muscles tighten instead of relaxing, and tension interferes with smooth emptying. So instead, Let gravity and bladder contractions do the work naturally. Calm breathing helps tremendously here. Slow, steady, unhurried. Now, once the initial stream ends, most people would stand up immediately. But this is the moment where double voiding truly begins. Stay seated. Wait quietly for 30 to 60 seconds. At first, this pause may feel unnecessary. Nothing seems to be happening. But internally, the bladder and nervous system are recalibrating. Residual urine shifts position. Pelvic muscles continue relaxing. Bladder contractions reorganize subtly. Now add another simple element. Take a few slow, deep breaths. Inhale gently. Exhale slowly. Notice how the body softens with each breath. The shoulders drop. The abdomen relaxes. Internal pressure changes subtly. Now lean slightly forward, not dramatically, just enough to alter bladder positioning gently. This small movement can help residual urine collect toward the outlet more effectively. And then try urinating again. Very often, another small release occurs, sometimes surprisingly more than expected. That second release represents urine the bladder failed to eliminate during the first attempt, residual volume. And removing that leftover urine can significantly delay nighttime bladder filling. Now imagine the difference between starting the night with 10% residual urine versus starting nearly empty. The kidneys continue producing urine at the same rate, but the bladder now has much more capacity before reaching the wake-up threshold. That extra time can mean the difference between uninterrupted sleep and a frustrating 2 a.m. awakening. Now here's something fascinating psychologically. Men often discover during double voiding that their body was never truly finished the first time. And once they feel the second release happen consistently, they suddenly realize how often they had been rushing unconsciously. The body had been asking for more time all along. Now remember, none of this is about perfection. The bladder will never empty with absolute mathematical precision every single night. That's not realistic. The goal is simply improving efficiency enough to reduce unnecessary awakenings. Small improvements compound beautifully over time. Now there's another hidden benefit to this technique. It slows the nervous system down before sleep. Think about modern bedtime routines: screens, stress, rushing, mental noise, constant stimulation. Most people move into sleep carrying residual tension throughout the body. Double voiding interrupts that momentum. For one quiet minute, the body pauses. Breathing slows, attention softens, muscles release. In a strange way, the technique becomes almost meditative. And because the bladder and nervous system communicate so closely, calming one often calms the other. Now, this becomes especially important for men who wake repeatedly due to bladder sensitivity rather than massive urine volume. Remember earlier we discussed how some men awaken even when the bladder isn't completely full? In those cases, reducing residual irritation and residual urine together can be extremely helpful. The bladder begins the night quieter, less reactive, less pressured, less sensitive. Now here's another subtle but powerful point. Many men begin dreading nighttime urination psychologically. The brain starts expecting interruption, and expectation itself fragments sleep. But when a man develops a calm, effective bedtime routine, confidence slowly returns. The body feels more prepared, more organized, and that psychological reassurance matters more than people think. Because deep sleep requires safety, not only physical safety, nervous system safety. The brain sleeps deepest when it stops anticipating disruption. Now let me ask you something quietly. How often do we rush the body through processes that were never designed to be rushed? Eating, breathing, resting, even urinating. Modern life trains urgency into everything. But biology still operates through rhythm and relaxation. And sometimes healing begins not by adding something new, but by slowing down enough for the body to complete what it was already trying to do. That's the hidden elegance behind double voiding. No extreme intervention, just cooperation. Now, importantly, this technique does not solve every cause of nighttime urination. And that matters to understand honestly, because if fluid timing remains poor, meals stay excessively late, sleep becomes fragmented, or temperature continues disrupting hormone function, the bladder still faces nighttime stress. Everything remains interconnected. But double voiding removes one more hidden disadvantage, one more layer of unnecessary nighttime pressure. And when multiple small improvements combine together, the results can feel surprisingly dramatic. Now we are approaching another invisible force shaping nighttime urination, one most men almost never consider: the temperature of the room itself, because the body's relationship with heat and cold directly affects kidney activity, hormone balance, circulation, and ultimately whether the bladder stays quiet through the night or wakes you again before dawn. Because the body's relationship with heat and cold directly affects kidney activity, hormone balance, circulation, and ultimately whether the bladder stays quiet through the night or wakes you again before dawn. And this is where many men become genuinely shocked, because they spend months adjusting water intake, meal timing, supplements, and nighttime routines, while completely ignoring the environment surrounding their body for 8 straight hours every night. The bedroom itself, its temperature, its airflow, its humidity, its trapped heat, what scientists sometimes call the sleep microclimate. Now think about how sensitive the human body truly is during sleep. When we are awake, the brain constantly compensates for discomfort. We move, adjust, stretch, shift positions. But during sleep, the body becomes more vulnerable to environmental stress. Even small temperature imbalances can subtly change hormone production, sleep depth, circulation, heart rate, kidney behavior, and bladder sensitivity. And because these changes unfold quietly over hours, most people never connect them to nighttime urination. Yet the connection is remarkably powerful. Now let's begin with heat. A room that is too warm often creates shallow sleep without people realizing it. The body struggles to cool itself properly. Sweating may increase slightly. Restlessness increases. Deep sleep decreases. And here's the critical part. Deep sleep is strongly connected to hormonal regulation, especially ADH. Remember earlier when we discussed ADH, the antidiuretic hormone responsible for helping the kidneys conserve water overnight? ADH works best when the body successfully transitions into stable deep sleep, but overheating interferes with that transition. The nervous system remains more active. Sleep becomes fragmented. The body drifts toward lighter sleep stages more frequently. And lighter sleep changes how the kidneys behave overnight. Now imagine what happens biologically. Instead of entering full nighttime conservation mode, the body remains partially stuck between daytime and nighttime physiology. ADH signaling weakens, kidney filtration stays relatively elevated, urine production increases gradually. Then around 2 in the morning, the bladder finally reaches the threshold that wakes the brain. Now here's something fascinating. Many men who sleep in overheated rooms never describe themselves as hot. Instead, they say, "I toss and turn. I wake up restless. My sleep doesn't feel deep. I'm tired even after sleeping." The body doesn't always scream its discomfort loudly. Sometimes it whispers through fragmented sleep architecture. Now let's move to the opposite extreme, cold. And surprisingly, excessive cold can trigger nighttime urination even more directly. This phenomenon has a scientific name, cold-induced diuresis. In simpler terms, cold temperatures can literally increase urine production. Now at first this seems strange. Why would cold make the kidneys produce more urine? The answer reveals another beautiful survival mechanism hidden inside the human body. When the body becomes cold, blood vessels in the arms and legs begin constricting. This helps preserve heat around vital organs. It's an ancient survival response. The body protects the core first. But this creates an important circulatory shift. As blood vessels tighten in the extremities, more blood gets pushed toward the center of the body. Now suddenly, central blood volume increases, and the kidneys interpret this increase very specifically. They essentially think there is too much circulating fluid. So the kidneys begin filtering more aggressively to reduce what they perceive as excess volume. The result? More urine production. Now think about how incredible this system truly is. The kidneys are not directly reacting to water intake. They are reacting to circulatory signals, pressure, volume, distribution. Again, fluid distribution appears as one of the deepest hidden themes underneath nighttime urination. Not merely drinking, distribution. Now imagine a man sleeping in an overly cold room with thin circulation in the legs and feet. The body spends hours constricting blood vessels to preserve heat. Central circulation increases. Kidney activity increases. Bladder filling accelerates. Then once again, the familiar awakening arrives before dawn. Now suddenly the body's behavior stops feeling random. Everything follows physiology. Now here's where things become even more subtle. Some men alternate between overheating and overcooling throughout the same night. Heavy blankets, cold air conditioning, sweating, then chilling. The body keeps adjusting continuously instead of remaining stable. And stability is exactly what deep sleep requires. The nervous system loves consistency. Temperature swings create biological turbulence. Now let's connect this to aging too. As men age, temperature regulation often becomes less efficient. Sleep also naturally becomes lighter, which means environmental discomfort wakes the brain more easily than before. A slightly overheated room that a younger body once ignored completely may now fragment sleep repeatedly. A mildly cold bedroom that once felt refreshing may now stimulate nighttime urination. Again, not weakness, sensitivity. The body becomes more responsive over time. Now here's another fascinating observation. Many men notice they urinate more frequently in hotels, unfamiliar rooms, or heavily air-conditioned environments. Part of that comes from stress and lighter sleep, but temperature instability contributes too. The body notices everything, even when consciousness does not. Now think about modern bedroom culture for a moment. Sealed rooms, heavy synthetic bedding, poor airflow, screens generating heat, aggressive air conditioning, thick pajamas. Many sleep environments unintentionally fight against the body's natural nighttime cooling process. And when the body cannot regulate temperature efficiently, sleep depth suffers. Hormonal rhythms suffer. Kidney rhythms suffer. Bladder stability suffers. Everything connected again. Now let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever noticed nights where you woke up needing to urinate, but also felt either strangely hot or unusually cold? That overlap is rarely accidental. The body's temperature regulation and fluid regulation systems constantly communicate with each other. And once you begin noticing these patterns, sleep starts making much more sense. Now, importantly, the goal is not creating an artificially cold room. That's a common misunderstanding. Extreme cold can become just as disruptive as excessive heat. The goal is gentle thermal balance, a room cool enough to support deep sleep, but not cold enough to trigger circulatory stress. Calmness, consistency, stability. The same principles we keep rediscovering throughout this entire conversation. And next, we're going even deeper into the fascinating mechanism behind cold-induced urination itself. Because once you understand exactly how blood vessels, circulation, and kidney pressure interact during cold exposure, you may never think about nighttime bathroom trips the same way again. Because once you understand exactly how blood vessels, circulation, and kidney pressure interact during cold exposure, you may never think about nighttime bathroom trips the same way again. At first, the idea sounds almost absurd. How could feeling cold possibly make someone urinate more? Most people assume urine production depends almost entirely on drinking, but the body is not measuring only intake. It is constantly monitoring pressure, circulation, and fluid distribution. And cold changes all three. Now imagine an ancient human thousands of years ago sleeping outdoors during a freezing night. The body's highest priority would not be comfort. It would be survival. Preserve heat, protect vital organs, maintain circulation to the brain and heart. Everything else becomes secondary, so the body activates one of its oldest survival reflexes, peripheral vasoconstriction. In simple language, the blood vessels in the hands, feet, arms, and legs begin narrowing. This reduces heat loss from the skin. Warm blood gets pulled away from the extremities and redirected toward the core. Now think carefully about what this means. The total amount of fluid inside the body has not actually increased, but the location of that fluid changes dramatically. Suddenly, much more blood volume becomes concentrated around the chest and abdominal organs, and the kidneys interpret this shift very specifically. They sense increased central blood pressure and increased circulatory volume. To the kidneys, it feels as though the body suddenly has too much fluid, even though no extra water was consumed. This is the key hidden insight. Cold tricks the kidneys through redistribution, not through actual hydration increase. And once the kidneys believe central blood volume is elevated, they respond exactly as they were designed to. They begin removing fluid. Filtering increases. Urine production rises. The bladder fills faster. Now suddenly, a cold bedroom becomes biologically connected to a 2 a.m. bathroom trip. Not psychologically, not symbolically, physiologically. Now, here's what makes this mechanism so fascinating. The body is not malfunctioning, it is protecting itself. From an evolutionary perspective, reducing fluid volume during cold exposure may have helped maintain optimal blood pressure and circulation efficiency under survival conditions. Again and again tonight, we keep discovering the same truth. Many frustrating modern symptoms are ancient biological systems doing exactly what they evolved to do, just in environments very different from the ones they were designed for. Now let's make this even easier to visualize. Imagine traffic flowing through a giant city. During warm, relaxed conditions, cars spread naturally across every neighborhood. But during an emergency, authorities suddenly close roads on the outer edges of the city and redirect traffic toward the center. Now central congestion increases rapidly. That is essentially what cold exposure does to circulation. Blood retreats inward, and the kidneys notice immediately. Now here's another important layer. The colder the extremities become, the stronger this response may become. This is why cold feet at night often correlate with increased awakenings. Many men ignore cold feet completely. They think it's just uncomfortable. But physiologically, cold extremities may signal ongoing vascular constriction and central fluid shifting throughout the night. The body remains in defensive mode instead of restorative mode. Now think about what this means emotionally. A man may spend months obsessing over water intake, while his real trigger is sleeping in an environment that keeps activating subtle cold stress every night. Again, hidden cause, delayed effect, the recurring pattern underneath nearly every nighttime awakening. Now let's connect this to sleep depth too. Cold-induced circulation changes can fragment sleep even before the bladder fully fills. Why? Because the nervous system monitors body temperature constantly. If the body struggles to maintain thermal balance, micro-awakenings increase. Sleep becomes lighter. And once sleep becomes lighter, bladder sensations become harder for the brain to ignore. So cold creates a double effect: more urine production, plus greater sensitivity to bladder signals. Now suddenly the nighttime awakenings multiply. Now here's where things become even more subtle. Some men do not sleep in obviously cold rooms at all. Instead, the issue is localized cold exposure. Cold feet outside blankets, air conditioning blowing directly on the body, thin bedding over the legs, temperature drops near dawn. Even small temperature changes during the second half of the night can influence circulation patterns significantly. And notice something interesting. Many men report waking around 2 or 3 in the morning, feeling the coldest. That timing is not random. Core body temperature naturally drops during the night as part of normal sleep physiology. So if the room environment becomes too cold during this already vulnerable thermal phase, circulatory compensation intensifies. Then kidney activity increases shortly afterward. Then comes the familiar awakening. Again, the body follows timing patterns, not chaos. Now let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever gone to sleep feeling comfortable, only to wake hours later with cold feet and a strong urge to urinate? That combination reveals an enormous amount about what the body was doing beneath consciousness. Circulation shifting, blood vessel constriction, kidney compensation, bladder filling, all unfolding silently while you slept. Now here's another fascinating detail. Some men notice increased nighttime urination during winter months, even without changing hydration habits significantly. This often reflects seasonal changes in temperature regulation and circulation. The kidneys are responding differently because the environment changed, not because the body suddenly failed. And once again, understanding the mechanism removes some of the fear. Now, importantly, this does not mean sleeping in a hot room is the answer. Remember, overheating disrupts deep sleep and weakens ADH activity. The body needs balance, gentle coolness, stable warmth, thermal consistency, not extremes, because biological systems thrive under stability. Now think about how elegant the body truly is. The kidneys are constantly listening. The blood vessels are constantly adapting. Hormones constantly recalibrate. The nervous system constantly monitors survival conditions. Everything communicating continuously. And nighttime urination is often just the visible surface of that enormous hidden conversation. Now, as we move deeper toward the final and most important hidden cause, notice how frequently fluid redistribution keeps returning to the center of this mystery. Not simply drinking, redistribution, movement, circulation, gravity. And that final piece, the most overlooked piece of all, may explain why so many men wake almost predictably at the same exact hour every night, even when they believe they've done everything else correctly. And that final piece, the most overlooked piece of all, may explain why so many men wake almost predictably at the same exact hour every night, even when they believe they've done everything else correctly. But before we uncover that deepest hidden mechanism, we need to pause for a moment and understand something surprisingly important. The body does not need perfect temperature to sleep well. It needs stable temperature, balanced temperature, a thermal environment gentle enough that the nervous system can stop defending itself. Because sleep is not simply unconsciousness. Sleep is trust. The body must feel safe enough to release vigilance, and temperature plays a major role in that sense of safety. Now, after everything we've explored about overheating, cold-induced urination, circulation shifts, and hormonal disruption, a natural question appears. So what temperature actually helps the body sleep best? For many men living in warm climates, especially humid environments, a bedroom temperature around 25 to 26 degrees Celsius often creates a very effective balance. Cool enough to support deep sleep, warm enough to avoid cold-induced circulation stress. Not freezing, not stuffy, gentle. Now, this surprises people sometimes because modern culture often promotes extremely cold sleeping environments as ideal. But the body is not trying to win a survival contest against the air conditioner. It's trying to maintain equilibrium. And equilibrium is delicate, especially overnight. Now imagine two different sleeping environments. In one room, heavy blankets, thick pajamas, poor airflow, trapped body heat, warm, humid air. The body struggles continuously to release heat. Sweating increases, micro-awakenings increase, sleep depth decreases, ADH signaling weakens. Now imagine the opposite extreme. Aggressive air conditioning, cold, dry airflow, cold feet, chilled hands, repeated vascular constriction. Now circulation shifts inward, kidney activity increases, bladder filling accelerates. Both extremes create stress, and stress fragments sleep. That's why balance matters far more than intensity. Now let's talk about clothing, because many men unknowingly create overheating around the body even when room temperature itself seems reasonable. Heavy sleepwear, synthetic fabrics, tight clothing, layers trapping moisture and heat. The skin cannot regulate temperature efficiently. And remember, the body naturally cools itself slightly during healthy sleep transitions. That cooling process is part of normal biology, but thick restrictive clothing interferes with it. Now the body remains subtly uncomfortable for hours. Again, maybe not enough to wake consciously, but enough to reduce sleep quality and hormonal stability. This is why breathable fabrics matter. Lightweight materials, airflow, moisture release. The body sleeps best when it can regulate itself naturally instead of fighting trapped heat all night long. Now think about how different the body feels in loose, breathable clothing compared to thick, heavy sleepwear. The nervous system relaxes differently. Circulation behaves differently. Even breathing changes subtly. The body softens. Now blankets matter too. Many people instinctively use heavy bedding because psychological comfort feels soothing, and emotional comfort absolutely matters for sleep. But physiologically, excessively heavy blankets can create thermal instability if the body overheats underneath them, especially in humid climates. This is why lighter adjustable bedding often works better. The goal is flexibility. The body should be able to maintain stable warmth without sweating or chilling. Again, stability. That word keeps returning throughout everything we discussed tonight. Stable hydration, stable circulation, stable temperature, stable nervous system activity. The body thrives under calm consistency. Now here's another subtle detail most people overlook. The body's temperature needs are not identical throughout the entire night. During early sleep, cooling helps initiate deeper sleep transitions. But near dawn, body temperature naturally begins rising again. That means environments that feel comfortable at bedtime may feel too cold several hours later. This is why adjustable bedding matters more than rigid solutions. The body's needs shift gradually during sleep cycles. Now let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever had a night where the room itself seemed fine, but your feet became cold while the rest of your body felt warm? That imbalance matters. Localized temperature discomfort can disturb circulation and sleep stability even when overall room temperature appears acceptable. Cold extremities often signal ongoing vascular constriction. And as we explored earlier, vascular constriction changes kidney behavior. Everything loops together. Now, here's another fascinating observation. Many men wake during the night not realizing they are slightly overheated until they remove the blanket and suddenly feel relief. Others wake feeling chilled after sweating earlier under heavy bedding. These tiny cycles of overheating and cooling create repeated physiological adjustments all night long. The nervous system never fully settles, and once the nervous system stays partially vigilant, bladder signals become much harder to ignore. Now notice something profound here. The bladder itself is often not the true villain. It's simply the final messenger. The deeper story involves sleep depth, hormones, temperature, circulation, fluid distribution, nervous system sensitivity. The bladder merely announces what the rest of the body has already been experiencing for hours. That realization changes how men approach the problem emotionally. Instead of fighting the bladder, they begin supporting the entire sleep environment. Now here's something beautifully encouraging. Small environmental improvements often produce surprisingly rapid benefits. A lighter blanket, breathable pajamas, slightly adjusted room temperature, better airflow, tiny changes. But the body notices tiny changes constantly. And when several small improvements combine together, sleep quality can shift dramatically. Not overnight perfection, but gradual restoration. And honestly, this is one of the most hopeful aspects of sleep science. The body wants to recover. It is always trying to move toward balance. Sometimes it simply needs fewer obstacles. Now, as we move toward the deepest hidden mechanism underneath the 2 a.m. awakening pattern, remember the recurring thread we've uncovered again and again tonight: fluid movement. Not merely fluid intake, movement, redistribution, circulation shaped by hormones, digestion, temperature, and now something even more powerful: gravity itself. Because the final and most important mistake many men make has nothing to do with what they drink, what they eat, or how cold the room feels. It begins much earlier. While they are standing, walking, and carrying the invisible weight of fluid in their legs all day long. It begins much earlier, while they are standing, walking, and carrying the invisible weight of fluid in their legs all day long. And this, more than almost anything else we've discussed tonight, may be the hidden master key behind the mysterious 2 a.m. awakening. Gravity. Simple, constant, invisible. A force so ordinary that most people never imagine it could shape their sleep. And yet gravity quietly influences circulation every second of the day, especially in the lower body. Now think about how long the average man spends upright, standing, walking, sitting with feet downward, driving, working. Hour after hour, gravity continuously pulls fluid toward the legs and feet. Not dramatically, not painfully at first, just gradually. Tiny amounts of fluid slowly shift downward throughout the day due to hydrostatic pressure inside the blood vessels. And because this process happens silently, most men never notice it consciously, until evening. Now, suddenly, certain clues begin appearing. Shoes feel tighter, socks leave marks around the ankles, legs feel heavier, feet feel swollen, calves feel dense or fatigued. Many men dismiss these sensations completely. They assume, I was just on my feet all day. I'm tired. It's normal. And in one sense, it is normal, but it also reveals something critical: fluid accumulation. Now, here's where the entire nighttime mystery suddenly starts connecting together. That fluid trapped in the legs during the day does not stay there permanently. The moment the body lies down horizontally, gravity changes completely. The downward pull disappears. And suddenly, the fluid that spent hours pooling in the lower body begins redistributing back into circulation. Now think carefully about what this means biologically. The bloodstream effectively receives an increase in circulating fluid volume during the early part of sleep. Not because more water was consumed, not because the bladder malfunctioned, because gravity changed. This is why so many men wake at nearly the same time every night. The process unfolds on a delayed timetable. Fluid gradually returns to circulation. The kidneys detect increased blood volume, filtration increases, urine production rises, then several hours later, the bladder reaches its limit, and the man wakes around 2 in the morning believing the problem began at bedtime. But the process actually began 12 hours earlier while he was standing. Now suddenly the pattern becomes astonishingly logical. The body is not acting randomly, it is responding to physics. Now let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever noticed your legs or feet looking slightly puffier in the evening than in the morning? Or maybe your shoes feel tighter at night than when you first put them on? That is not imagination. That is fluid redistribution happening in real time. And for many men, nighttime urination is simply the second half of that same story. Now here's what makes this mechanism so powerful. It operates independently of many other factors. A man can avoid late water, eat carefully, manage room temperature, empty his bladder properly, and still wake repeatedly if large amounts of fluid continue returning from the legs overnight. That's why this final hidden cause often surprises people the most, because it has nothing to do with the bladder itself. Again, the bladder is merely the messenger. The real activity is happening in circulation. Now think about how beautifully interconnected the body truly is. Blood vessels, gravity, kidneys, hormones, sleep cycles, everything communicating continuously. And gravity influences all of them silently from the background. Now here's another fascinating observation. Men who sit for very long hours during the day may experience this issue even more intensely. Why? Because circulation in the legs becomes sluggish. Muscle contractions decrease, fluid return weakens. The legs essentially become reservoirs for fluid accumulation throughout the day. Then bedtime arrives. The body lies flat, redistribution begins. The kidneys suddenly inherit the burden hours later. Again, delayed cause and nighttime effect. Now this mechanism becomes even stronger with aging. As vein efficiency gradually changes over time, fluid may pool more easily in the lower extremities. Muscle pumping activity decreases, circulatory return slows, tissue elasticity changes. Now even more fluid remains trapped during daytime hours, and nighttime redistribution intensifies further. This is one reason nighttime urination becomes increasingly common as men grow older, even when overall health appears relatively stable. Not weakness. Physics interacting with biology. Now here's another subtle layer many people never consider. The body actually prefers redistributing this fluid while lying down. From a circulatory perspective, horizontal positioning makes fluid return easier. So the body isn't failing. It's taking advantage of the sleeping position to normalize circulation. The kidneys simply respond to the increased central fluid volume afterward. Again, intelligent biology. Now imagine two different men. One spends the day moving regularly, elevating the legs occasionally, supporting circulation naturally. Another spends long hours seated or standing with significant lower leg fluid accumulation. Both drink similar amounts of water. But their nighttime kidney workload may become completely different, because the hidden variable was never just hydration. It was redistribution. This changes everything. Now notice how many of tonight's mysteries suddenly converge into one elegant theme. Cold pushes fluid centrally. Lying down redistributes fluid centrally. Heavy digestion changes fluid handling. Late hydration alters filtration timing. Everything eventually changes what the kidneys perceive inside circulation, and the kidneys respond accordingly. Now emotionally, this realization often creates enormous relief, because many men spend years blaming themselves, thinking, my bladder is weak, I'm just getting old, I must be drinking too much. But often the body is simply following fluid dynamics and gravitational physics exactly as designed. Understanding that removes unnecessary shame. Now here's the truly exciting part, because once the real mechanism becomes visible, a remarkably simple intervention suddenly appears. And this intervention directly targets the hidden gravitational problem itself. Not through medication, not through deprivation, but through timing and positioning. In other words, helping gravity work for you before sleep instead of against you after sleep begins. In other words, helping gravity work for you before sleep instead of against you after sleep begins. Because now we arrive at the hidden chain reaction that quietly unfolds inside the body every single night. And once you understand this sequence clearly, the mysterious 2 a.m. awakening suddenly stops feeling mysterious at all. It becomes predictable, almost mechanical. Now imagine the body at the end of a long day. For hours, gravity has been pulling fluid downward into the legs and feet, tiny amounts accumulating continuously inside tissues and blood vessels. Not enough to cause alarm, not enough to necessarily look dramatic, but enough. Now bedtime arrives. The body shifts from vertical to horizontal, and that single change, standing to lying down, completely transforms circulation. The legs are no longer hanging below the heart. Gravity no longer traps fluid downward. So slowly, quietly, over the next several hours, fluid begins returning upward into the bloodstream. Now this part is crucial. The body interprets returning fluid exactly the same way it interprets newly consumed fluid. The kidneys do not care where the fluid came from. They simply detect increased blood volume, increased vascular pressure, increased central circulation. And once those signals rise, the kidneys activate filtration. Now let's visualize this carefully. Imagine a river slowly swelling overnight. At first, the increase is subtle, barely noticeable, but hour after hour, more fluid continues flowing back toward the center of the body. The kidneys monitor this continuously. Then eventually they decide there is excess volume in circulation, so they begin removing it. Urine production increases gradually while the person remains asleep. Now remember something important. This process is not immediate. That's why men rarely wake 1 hour after falling asleep. The body needs time for redistribution, time for filtration, time for bladder filling, and that delay explains the famous timing pattern so many men experience. 1, 2, 3 in the morning. The body has been processing fluid for hours before the awakening finally occurs. Now suddenly the 2 a.m. curse stops seeming random. It follows physiology with remarkable precision. Now think about how many men misunderstand this entire sequence. They wake up at 2 in the morning and think, the problem just started. But biologically, the process may have begun. During afternoon sitting, during evening leg swelling, during hours of gravitational pooling earlier in the day. The awakening itself is merely the final chapter. Now here's another fascinating detail. Many men notice that the first urination during the night is unusually large. That matters because it often suggests the kidneys processed a significant amount of redistributed fluid after sleep began. Again, not just small bladder sensitivity. Volume. Real fluid movement. Now imagine two different situations. In one case, a man drinks excessive water right before bed. The bladder fills quickly from newly absorbed fluid. In another case, a man drinks reasonably but spends the entire day accumulating fluid in his legs. The kidneys later process that redistributed fluid overnight. The result may look identical externally, a 2 a.m. bathroom trip. But the mechanisms are completely different. This is why so many men fail when they only focus on drinking less water. They're solving the wrong problem. Now let's go even deeper. When the body lies down, not only does fluid return from the legs, circulation itself becomes more efficient centrally. Blood returns to the heart more easily. Cardiac filling changes. Kidney perfusion improves. The kidneys suddenly receive stronger blood flow than they experienced during long upright hours. And healthy kidneys respond vigorously to increased circulation. Again, not dysfunction, normal physiology. Now here's something that surprises many people. The body actually performs fluid redistribution most aggressively during the earlier phases of sleep, which means the first half of the night often determines whether someone wakes later. That's why certain evening habits matter so profoundly. Not because they instantly fill the bladder, but because they influence how much fluid becomes available for overnight filtration. Now let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever noticed that nighttime urination sometimes feels different from daytime urination? Heavier, longer, more relieving. That may reflect overnight fluid redistribution rather than simple recent drinking. The kidney spent hours processing returning fluid while you slept. Now another fascinating clue appears in the morning. Many men notice their feet or ankles look less swollen after waking compared to the evening before. Where did that fluid go? The kidneys removed much of it overnight. Again, the body solved a circulatory problem while simultaneously creating a sleep interruption. Now here's where everything we discussed tonight starts merging together beautifully. Late drinking increases available fluid. Heavy meals create additional metabolic fluid. Cold exposure shifts circulation centrally. Poor sleep weakens ADH. Gravity stores fluid in the legs. Then bedtime arrives, and the body begins redistributing everything. The kidneys inherit the workload. The bladder receives the result, the brain receives the signal. Finally, the awakening. Now, emotionally, understanding this mechanism changes the experience dramatically. Instead of seeing the body as broken, many men suddenly realize their body has been behaving logically all along. The kidneys are responding to circulation. The circulation is responding to gravity. The awakening is responding to bladder volume. Everything connected. Now, this understanding also explains why nighttime urination often becomes more frequent after long travel days, extended standing, sedentary office work, hot weather, or evenings with leg swelling. Each condition increases the likelihood of fluid pooling before sleep. Again, the body follows patterns, not randomness. And now, finally, we arrive at the practical strategy that directly interrupts this entire gravitational chain reaction before it reaches the bladder in the middle of the night. A deceptively simple technique, one that works with the body instead of fighting against it. And for many men, this single adjustment becomes the turning point that changes their sleep more than anything else they have tried. And now, after everything we've uncovered tonight, the hidden role of hormones, temperature, circulation, digestion, kidney activity, and gravity, we finally arrive at the simplest and perhaps most powerful question of all. What can you actually do tonight, before your head touches the pillow, to help your body stop waking you at 2 in the morning? The answer begins with something surprisingly gentle. Not fighting your bladder, not forcing yourself to drink almost nothing, not depending immediately on sleeping pills or miracle supplements, not punishing your body, but helping gravity finish its work before sleep instead of during sleep. Because now you understand the real chain reaction. Throughout the day, fluid slowly pools in the legs. Then the moment you lie down at night, that fluid begins returning into circulation. The kidneys detect increased blood volume, urine production rises, and hours later, the bladder wakes you up. So what if you could shift part of that process earlier? What if the body could redistribute and process some of that fluid before sleep even begins? This is where one simple evening habit becomes incredibly powerful, elevating the legs 1 to 2 hours before bedtime. Not dramatically, not uncomfortably, just enough so the legs rest slightly above heart level. That small positional change quietly tells gravity to reverse direction earlier. Now the fluid trapped in the lower legs begins moving back into circulation while you are still awake. The kidneys begin filtering earlier. The bladder empties earlier. And by the time deep sleep arrives, there is simply less excess fluid waiting to trigger a 2 a.m. awakening. Think about how different this approach feels compared to the way most people try to solve the problem. Most men focus only on restricting, drink less, eat less, worry more, force sleep. But the body responds far better to cooperation than punishment. And this technique works with physiology instead of against it. Now imagine the final 2 hours before bed becoming calmer and more intentional. The light slightly dimmer, the nervous system slowing down, your legs elevated comfortably on a pillow or recliner, your breathing softer, the body gradually shifting toward nighttime mode instead of crashing into sleep under stress. That transition matters more than most people realize, because sleep is not a switch, it is a biological descent. And the smoother that descent becomes, the quieter the body behaves overnight. Now here's something fascinating. Many men who try leg elevation for several evenings notice another unexpected benefit. Their legs feel lighter in the morning, less swollen, less tight. That alone reveals how much fluid redistribution had been occurring overnight before. Again, the body was never betraying them. It was adapting to circulation physics. Now there's another small adjustment that can quietly support this process even further. Sleeping on the left side. This may sound almost too simple to matter, but body position influences circulation, pressure patterns, breathing mechanics, and even how the bladder feels during the night. For many people, lying on the left side may improve blood return and reduce pressure around the bladder area compared to lying flat on the back. And sometimes tiny mechanical improvements repeated for 7 or 8 hours create surprisingly meaningful changes. That's one of the deepest lessons in sleep science. The body notices everything: tiny habits, tiny positions, tiny timing changes, and over weeks or months, those small signals shape the quality of sleep more than dramatic short-term solutions ever do. Now, maybe part of you listening tonight was hoping for a magic pill, one supplement, one hidden trick, one instant cure. But honestly, The real solution is usually less glamorous and far more powerful: understanding. Because once you truly understand what your body is doing, fear begins disappearing. You stop interpreting every nighttime awakening as proof that something is wrong with you. Instead, you begin seeing patterns. You recognize how late meals affect sleep, how cold changes urination, how circulation affects the kidneys, how fluid shifts throughout the day, how hormones depend on sleep depth, how gravity quietly influences everything. And suddenly your body stops feeling like an enemy. It starts feeling understandable. That emotional shift matters deeply because frustration itself can become part of the cycle. Many men go to bed already anxious about waking up again, already irritated before sleep even begins, and the nervous system carries that tension into the night. But understanding creates calm. Calm creates deeper sleep. Deeper sleep improves hormonal balance. Better hormonal balance stabilizes nighttime urination. Everything connects. Now I want to tell you something important before we finish tonight. Please do not try changing all 5 habits at once. That usually fails. The brain becomes overwhelmed. The routines feel unnatural. The changes disappear after a few days. Instead, choose one. Just one. Maybe tonight you stop drinking earlier. Maybe you elevate your legs. Maybe you cool the room slightly. Maybe you avoid heavy late dinners. Maybe you try double voiding before sleep. One small adjustment, then repeat it consistently. Because real biological change rarely happens through intensity. It happens through repetition. Quiet repetition. The body loves rhythm. It loves predictability. It loves steady signals repeated over time. And small victories matter more than people think. One fewer nighttime awakening, one slightly deeper sleep cycle, one more energized morning. Those changes accumulate, night after night, week after week, until eventually something surprising happens. You stop thinking about your bladder all the time. You stop fearing 2 in the morning, and sleep begins feeling natural again instead of stressful. Now, before we end this conversation, I'd genuinely love to hear from you. Which part of tonight's discussion felt most familiar? Was it the late water? The heavy dinners? The cold room? The gravity connection? The fluid pooling in the legs? Or maybe for the first time, you suddenly understood why your body keeps waking you at exactly the same hour every night. Share it down in the comments, because someone else reading your experience may finally realize they are not alone. And if you're serious about starting this journey tonight, type one word in the comments: determined. Because lasting health changes rarely begin with giant, dramatic moments. They begin quietly, with awareness, with understanding, with one decision repeated consistently. And if this conversation helped you understand your body in a completely new way, don't forget to subscribe and stay connected. Because this channel is not just about symptoms. It's about decoding the hidden biology behind the struggles millions of people silently live with every day. Sleep, hormones, circulation, aging, energy, recovery, longevity. The things that shape how life actually feels. Thank you for spending this time here tonight. And wherever you are right now, I truly hope your next night of sleep feels a little quieter, a little deeper, and a little more peaceful than the last.